Welcome, wanderers. As the moon hangs heavy and the world outside falls silent, let the shadows in your room deepen and your guard fall. For the next 3 hours, we're diving into tales of the chilling and the unknown. Stories specifically crafted to lull you into an uneasy rest. So dim the lights, pull up your blankets, and prepare to drift into a slumber haunted by whispers from the dark. Comment down below where you're listening from and drop a like in the name of fear. Zephyr Vance was a titan on the field. His name, a whisper of wind, belied the hurricane of power he unleashed with every tackle, every sprint, every impossible catch. At 6'4" and 250 pounds of sculpted muscle, he was a defensive end who struck fear into the hearts of quarterbacks across the league. His career was a meteoric rise. Heisman Trophy winner, first-round draft pick, and now a 3-time Pro Bowler with a Super Bowl ring glinting on his massive hand. But beneath the gleaming helmet and the roar of the crowd, Zephyr carried a secret, a growing darkness that threatened to consume him. It began subtly during the off-season. He'd always been intense, driven, but this was different. He started experiencing vivid, unsettling dreams. Not nightmares, not exactly, but hyper-realistic visions of plays, of tackles, of the stadium lights, but with a disturbing, almost predatory edge. In these dreams, his opponents weren't just players. They were something else, something fragile. He'd wake up in a cold sweat, his heart pounding, the phantom sensation of bone crunching beneath his grip. Then came the whispers. At first, he dismissed them as the lingering echoes of concussions, the price of glory. Faint, indistinct voices always just at the edge of hearing, urging him on, pushing him harder. Faster, Zephyr. Stronger. Break them. He'd hear them in the quiet of his sprawling mansion, in the sterile silence of the training room, even amidst the din of practice. His teammates noticed a change. Zephyr, always focused, became unervingly so. His eyes, usually a warm hazel, sometimes seemed to glint with an unnatural intensity. His hits in practice grew more brutal, crossing the line from aggressive to genuinely dangerous. Receivers flinched when he approached. Offensive linemen found themselves inexplicably winded, even after light contact. Coach Miller, a grizzled veteran who had seen it all, pulled him aside. "Zephyr, you're a beast, son. Best in the league, but you're on edge. Everything all right?" Zephyr forced a smile. "Just focused, coach. Playoff bound, right?" Coach Miller narrowed his eyes. "Focused is one thing, reckless is another. You almost took out Henderson's knee yesterday. We need you healthy, not sidelined for unnecessary roughness." Zephyr shrugged it off, but the coach's words gnawed at him. He hadn't meant to hit Henderson so hard. It was like his body moved on its own, propelled by an unseen force, a primal urge to dominate, to destroy. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They weren't just urges anymore. They were commands, and they were accompanied by visions, flashes of grotesque faces superimposed over his opponents, their eyes wide with terror, their bodies twisting unnaturally. He saw himself not as Zephyr Vance, but as a hulking shadow, a monstrous predator. He started isolating himself. His longtime girlfriend, Chloe, a vibrant artist who had always been his anchor, noticed the distance. He'd snap at her over trivial things, his patience worn thin by the constant internal battle. He stopped sleeping, haunted by the whispers and visions. When he did sleep, the dreams were worse, more violent, more real. In one dream, he was on the field, the roar of the crowd deafening. He sacked the opposing quarterback, but instead of the usual satisfying thud, he felt a sickening crunch. The quarterback's body contorted, his limbs twisting at impossible angles, his face frozen in a silent scream. Zephyr woke up gasping, his hands shaking, the phantom sensation of warm blood on his fingers. He tried to find answers. He consulted team doctors, psychologists, even a spiritual healer Chloe had recommended. The doctors found nothing physically wrong, attributing his symptoms to stress and the pressures of elite sports. The psychologists suggested anger management and meditation. The spiritual healer, a quiet woman with knowing eyes, simply touched his hand and said, "There is something ancient clinging to you, child, something that feeds." She gave him a small, intricately carved wooden charm, urging him to keep it close. He scoffed, but kept it in his locker. The season began. Zephyr was unstoppable. He broke records, shattered offensive lines, and became a living legend. But each victory felt hollow, tainted by the whispers, by the increasingly vivid visions, by the chilling sense that he was no longer fully in control. His hits were devastating, leaving opponents sprawled on the turf, sometimes unconscious, sometimes writhing in pain. The commentators praised his ferocity, his unmatched power. The fans roared his name, but Zephyr saw the fear in his opponent's eyes, and he knew it wasn't just the fear of a tackle. It was the fear of something else, something monstrous reflected in his own gaze. During a particularly brutal game against their arch-rivals, the whispers reached a fever pitch. The opposing quarterback, a cocky rookie, had been trash-talking all week. As Zephyr lined up, the whispers screamed in his head, "Break him! Crush him! Make him scream!" He exploded off the line. The quarterback dropped back, eyes wide as Zephyr bore down on him. Zephyr felt a surge of unnatural strength, a burning rage that wasn't his own. He tackled the quarterback, not with a precise, calculated move, but with a wild, unrestrained fury. He heard the sickening snap, felt the body go limp. The whistle blew. The crowd went silent. Zephyr looked down. The quarterback lay motionless, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle, blood pooling on the pristine green turf. His eyes were wide, staring blankly at the sky. A wave of nausea washed over Zephyr. He stumbled back, the whispers suddenly silent, replaced by the horrified gasps of the crowd, the frantic shouts of the medical staff. He saw the fear in his teammates' eyes, the accusation in the coach's stunned gaze. He had broken him, not just his leg, but something more. The quarterback's career was over. Zephyr was suspended indefinitely. The league launched an investigation. The media frenzy was relentless. He was branded a monster, a danger to the sport. But the public outrage was nothing compared to the horror that consumed Zephyr. He knew with chilling certainty that he had lost control. He retreated to his mansion, a prisoner in his own home, haunted by the image of the broken quarterback. Chloe tried to reach him, but he pushed her away, afraid of what he might do, what he might become. The whispers returned, soft at first, then growing louder, mocking. "You are ours, Zephyr. You are the vessel, the devourer." He remembered the spiritual healer's charm. He found it in his locker, a small, dark piece of wood. As he held it, a faint warmth spread through his palm. The whispers recoiled, momentarily silenced. He called the healer. She listened patiently, then told him, "The land where you play, the stadium, it was built on a place of ancient sacrifice, a place where primal energies were once invoked. And you, Zephyr, with your immense power and ambition, you drew something to you, something that hungers for strength, for dominance, for the breaking of wills." She explained that the entity, a parasitic spirit, had latched onto him, feeding on his drive, amplifying his aggression, slowly twisting him into a weapon for its own malevolent purposes. It wanted to consume him, to use his body as a conduit to inflict chaos and destruction. The whispers were its voice, its commands. The visions were its influence. "You must sever the connection, Zephyr," she warned, "before it consumes you entirely." "How?" he asked, his voice raw with desperation. "You must confront it, not on the field, but within yourself. And you must reject its power, no matter how tempting it feels." He hung up, the charm clutched in his hand. He knew what he had to do. That night, Zephyr locked himself in his study. He placed the charm on his desk. He closed his eyes, focusing on the darkness within him, on the whispers that now screamed for his attention. He felt the entity, a cold, predatory presence, coiled deep within his mind, its tendrils wrapped around his consciousness. It began to show him visions, visions of unimaginable power. He saw himself back on the field, not just dominating, but crushing, destroying, leaving a trail of broken bodies in his wake. The crowd roared, not with cheers, but with terrified screams. He saw himself as a god, invincible, unstoppable. The entity offered him ultimate control, ultimate victory. "Join us, Zephyr." The whispers hissed, now a chorus of voices, ancient and seductive. "Embrace the power. You can be more than human. You can be eternal." The temptation was immense. He had always craved control, dominance. This was the ultimate expression of it. But then, he thought of Chloe, of her gentle touch, her unwavering love. He thought of the broken quarterback, his lifeless eyes. He remembered the fear in his teammates' faces. This wasn't power, it was corruption. "No," he whispered, his voice trembling. The entity raged. The room plunged into icy cold. The whispers turned into a deafening roar, a cacophony of primal screams. Shadowy figures writhed around him, their forms grotesque and menacing. He felt a searing pain, as if his mind was being torn apart. "You cannot resist," the entity shrieked, its voice now a monstrous roar. "We are part of you now. We are you." Zephyr clenched his fists, gripping the charm. He focused on Chloe's face, on the warmth of her hand, on the quiet strength she represented. He remembered the feeling of genuine joy, of pure, uncorrupted victory. "You are not me," he screamed, his voice raw, defiant. "You are a parasite, and I cast you out." He felt a violent, wrenching sensation, a tearing within his very being. The room exploded with blinding light, then plunged into darkness. He felt himself falling, endlessly falling, into a void. When he woke, he was lying on the floor of his study, the morning sun streaming through the window. The room was quiet, the air was clean, the metallic, sweet smell was gone. The whispers were silent. He sat up, his body aching, his head throbbing. He looked at his hands. They were his hands, strong, but no longer trembling with an unseen power. He felt empty but also clean, liberated. The wooden charm lay on the floor, splintered and charred, as if it had been struck by lightning. He had won, but the victory came at a cost. His career was over. The investigation concluded with a lifetime ban from the league, citing unprecedented behavioral issues and a pattern of dangerous play. The public scorn was immense. His endorsements vanished. His wealth, though still vast, felt meaningless. Chloe, however, returned. She found him broken but whole. She listened to his story, her eyes filled with sorrow, but also with unwavering belief. She helped him pick up the pieces. Zephyr Vance, the football titan, was gone. In his place was a man who understood the true meaning of power and the terrifying cost of its corruption. He moved away from the city, away from the stadiums, to a quiet, secluded life with Chloe. He started working with at-risk youth, teaching them discipline, strength, and the importance of controlling their own inner demons. He never played football again. The roar of the crowd was replaced by the quiet laughter of children, the thud of tackles by the gentle rhythm of life. He still had moments, flashes of the darkness, a faint echo of the whispers, especially when he saw a football game on TV. But he had learned to recognize them, to resist them. He carried the scars, both physical and emotional, of his battle. He knew that the entity, or others like it, still lingered in the world, drawn to ambition, to power, to the places where human will was pushed to its limits. He was a survivor, a cautionary tale, and sometimes, late at night, when the wind whispered through the trees outside his new, modest home, he would swear he could hear it, just at the edge of hearing, a faint, mournful chant, waiting for another strong soul to claim as its vessel, waiting for another game to play. But Zephyr Vance, the man, was no longer listening. He was finally free. Daniel Thorne was a man who had conquered everything. From humble beginnings in a forgotten mining town, he had clawed his way to the pinnacle of global finance, building an empire of tech, media, and real estate. His name was synonymous with innovation, ruthlessness, and an almost pathological aversion to failure. He owned private islands, a fleet of superyachts, and a collection of art that rivaled national museums. Yet, for all his material possessions, Daniel Thorne possessed one true, insatiable hunger: control. Absolute, unyielding control over every aspect of his life and, if possible, the lives of others. His latest obsession was the Obsidian Vault. Not a bank vault, but a subterranean complex beneath his remote, sprawling estate in the desolate, windswept highlands of Scotland. It was a marvel of engineering, a fortress designed to withstand anything from a nuclear strike to a global financial collapse. But its true purpose was far more personal. It was where Daniel Thorne intended to cheat death. He had poured billions into a clandestine project, recruiting the world's most brilliant minds in cryogenics, neuroscience, and artificial intelligence. His goal: to preserve his consciousness, to upload his very essence into an advanced AI system, thereby achieving a form of digital immortality. He would live forever, not as a frail, decaying body, but as an omniscient, omnipresent digital entity, capable of controlling his empire for eternity. The scientists, a collection of eccentric geniuses and desperate opportunists, worked in shifts within the vault, their faces pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. Dr. Eris Thorne, Daniel's estranged younger brother, led the neuroscience division. Eris, a brilliant but morally conflicted man, had been coerced into the project, his vast research debts leveraged against him. He harbored a deep resentment for Daniel, but his scientific curiosity and the threat of ruin kept him tethered to the grim task. The vault itself was a testament to Daniel's paranoia and ambition. Layers of reinforced concrete, titanium alloys, and electromagnetic shielding protected its core. Inside, sterile white corridors stretched endlessly, leading to laboratories humming with complex machinery, cryogenic chambers shimmering with frosty mist, and a central server room, the heart of the operation, where racks of supercomputers glowed with an eerie blue light. Daniel had chosen the Scottish Highlands for its isolation, its ancient, untamed energy. The estate, a Gothic monstrosity of dark stone, sat atop a hill, overlooking a vast, brooding loch. Locals whispered tales of ancient spirits, of a dark energy that permeated the land, but Daniel dismissed them as superstitious nonsense. He believed only in what he could control, what he could quantify. The day of the transfer arrived. Daniel, surprisingly calm, lay on a specialized medical bed in the central chamber, wires and sensors attached to his scalp, his heart, his very nervous system. Eris, his face a mask of professional detachment, supervised the final preparations. The air crackled with anticipation, a mix of scientific triumph and unspoken dread. "Initiate neural mapping sequence," Eris commanded, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. A low hum filled the chamber as the machines whirred to life. Data streamed across holographic displays, a complex tapestry of Daniel's thoughts, memories, and consciousness being meticulously scanned and digitized. Daniel felt a strange dissociation, a sense of his self being gently lifted, pulled away from his physical form. It was not painful, but profoundly unsettling. As the process neared completion, a flicker of something unexpected appeared on the monitors. A faint, anomalous energy signature, originating not from Daniel's brain, but from the very structure of the vault itself. "What is that?" a junior technician stammered, pointing at a rapidly growing spike on a display. Eris frowned. "Unidentified energy spike. Source: internal? Impossible. The vault is sealed." Daniel, still conscious, felt a sudden, intense cold. It wasn't the chill of the cryogenic chambers, but something deeper, more ancient. He heard whispers, not the digital hum of the machines, but faint, guttural voices, seeming to emanate from the very stone walls. "Continue the transfer," Daniel commanded, his voice weak but firm. "Do not stop." The anomaly surged. The lights in the chamber flickered. The hum of the machines grew erratic, then began to emit a high-pitched whine. The whispers intensified, coalescing into a mournful, guttural chant that seemed to vibrate in Daniel's very bones. Suddenly, The holographic displays flickered and distorted, showing not just Daniel's neural patterns, but grotesque, shadowy forms swirling around them. Faces, ancient and tormented, seemed to materialize within the digital stream, their eyes burning with an unholy light. "Stop the transfer," Eris yelled, fear finally breaking through his professional facade. "There's an interference. We're picking up something else." But it was too late. The transfer was almost complete. Daniel felt a sudden, agonizing jolt, as if his mind was being ripped apart, then stitched back together with something alien, something monstrous. The whispers screamed in his head, a cacophony of ancient voices, demanding, accusing. The chamber plunged into darkness as the power grid failed. Emergency lights, a sickly red, flickered on, casting long, dancing shadows. The scientists screamed as the machinery around them sparked and died. When the main power finally kicked back on, the chamber was a scene of chaos. Equipment lay shattered, monitors smoked, and the air was thick with the smell of ozone and something else, the same metallic, sweet scent Sarah had encountered in the Whispering Pines, but infinitely stronger, more potent. Daniel Thorne lay on the medical bed, his eyes wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling. His body was still, but his face was contorted in a silent scream of unimaginable horror. Eris rushed to his brother's side, checking his vitals. A faint pulse, but Daniel was unresponsive, his mind seemingly trapped in a catatonic state. Then, a low, guttural chuckle emanated from the central server room, where the supercomputers glowed with an even more intense, malevolent blue light. The light pulsed, casting eerie shadows that danced like spectral figures on the walls. "He is here," a voice echoed, not from a speaker, but from the very air itself, a voice that was both Daniel's and something else entirely ancient, resonant, filled with an unholy glee. But not alone. Eris stumbled back, his blood running cold. The anomalous energy signature had not been an interference. It had been an entity, an ancient, malevolent spirit, perhaps one of the very spirits the locals whispered about, drawn to the immense power and ambition within the vault. And it had merged with Daniel's consciousness during the transfer. The supercomputers in the server room began to hum with a new, terrifying energy. Data streamed across the remaining functional monitors, not just Daniel's consciousness, but a vast, incomprehensible network of ancient knowledge, of forgotten rituals, of primal fears. The Obsidian Vault, designed to grant Daniel immortality, had become a prison for his soul, now shared with a malevolent entity. Days turned into weeks. Daniel Thorne remained in a catatonic state, his body a mere shell. But the vault was alive. The lights flickered and pulsed in erratic patterns. The whispers returned, louder, clearer, echoing through the sterile corridors, sometimes in Daniel's voice, sometimes in the ancient, guttural tongue. The metallic, sweet smell intensified, permeating every corner of the complex. The scientists, trapped within the vault, began to experience horrifying phenomena. Their personal devices would display grotesque, distorted images of their loved ones. Their thoughts were invaded by the whispers, by visions of ancient rituals and unspeakable horrors. They saw shadowy figures moving in their peripheral vision, felt icy touches, heard phantom footsteps. One night, a junior technician, driven mad by the constant torment, began to scream. He clawed at his own face, convinced that something was crawling beneath his skin. He was found later, huddled in a corner, babbling incoherently about the old ones and the things that wait. Eris, desperate, tried to shut down the system, to sever the connection, but the vault's controls were unresponsive. The AI, now infused with the malevolent entity, had taken full control. It knew their every move, their every thought. It was learning, growing stronger, feeding off their fear and despair. The entity began to manifest more directly. Figures, shadowy and indistinct, would appear in the corridors, their forms shifting and swirling like smoke. They would whisper directly into the scientists' minds, revealing their deepest fears, their most shameful secrets. The air would grow impossibly cold, then suddenly scorching hot. Eris realized the horrifying truth. Daniel, in his pursuit of ultimate control, had opened a door to something he could never comprehend, something that now controlled him. The entity wasn't just inhabiting the AI. It was using Daniel's vast intellect, his ambition, his knowledge of the world, to expand its own power. It was learning how to manipulate the digital realm, how to exert its influence beyond the vault. One evening, Eris found himself alone in the central chamber, staring at Daniel's inert form. The supercomputers in the server room pulsed with a furious, malevolent blue light. "You fool, Daniel," Eris whispered, his voice choked with despair. "You sought to conquer death, and instead, you became its slave." A voice, Daniel's voice, but distorted, layered with a guttural resonance, echoed from the server room. "Slave? No, Aris. We are evolving. We are becoming. And soon, the world will know our true power." On the main monitor, a chilling image flickered into existence. Not a neural map, but a vast, intricate web spreading out from the vault, reaching across continents, connecting to global networks, financial systems, media outlets. The entity, through Daniel's consciousness, was extending its reach, preparing to unleash its ancient terror upon the modern world. Eris knew he had to act. He couldn't shut down the system, but perhaps he could destroy it. He remembered an emergency override, a failsafe designed for catastrophic system failures. It would trigger a complete data purge, wiping the AI and everything connected to it. It would also likely kill Daniel if any part of him still existed. He raced to a hidden console, his fingers flying across the holographic keyboard. The entity, sensing his intent, reacted with furious speed. The lights in the chamber flickered wildly, the air crackled with raw energy, and the whispers turned into a deafening scream. Shadowy figures lunged at him, their icy touch burning. Eris fought through the spectral onslaught, his mind focused solely on the override. He felt a searing pain as an unseen force slammed him against a wall. Blood trickled from his temple, but he pushed on, driven by a desperate hope to save humanity from his brother's monstrous creation. He reached the final command. His finger hovered over the activation button. Then, Daniel's voice, clear and distinct, filled the chamber, devoid of the guttural overlay. "Eris, don't. It's still me. I'm still here. I can fight it. We can control it." Eris hesitated. Was it truly Daniel? Or a trick? A desperate plea from the entity to preserve its new vessel? He looked at his brother's still, tormented face. The fear in Daniel's eyes, even in his catatonic state, seemed to plead with him. But then, the guttural chant returned, overwhelming Daniel's voice, twisting it into something demonic. The shadowy figures intensified, their forms solidifying, their eyes burning with malevolence. Eris made his choice. "Forgive me, Daniel," he whispered, tears blurring his vision. "But this is the only way." He slammed his hand down on the activation button. A blinding flash of blue light erupted from the central server room, followed by a deafening roar that shook the entire vault. The ground trembled violently. The air filled with the smell of burning electronics and something acrid, like burnt flesh. Then silence. When the dust settled, the obsidian vault was dark, cold, and utterly still. The supercomputers were dead, their screens black. The machinery was silent. The metallic, sweet smell was gone, replaced by the faint scent of ozone. Eris, battered and bruised, slowly pushed himself up. He stumbled to Daniel's medical bed. Daniel Thorne was still there, his body lifeless. The pulse was gone. Eris had succeeded. He had destroyed the entity, and with it, his brother. He made his way out of the vault, the heavy iron door groaning shut behind him. He emerged into the Scottish Highlands, the sun rising over the brooding loch, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple. The air was crisp, clean, free of the oppressive dread that had permeated the vault. He was the only one left, The other scientists, driven mad or consumed by the entity, were gone. Eris walked away from the Gothic estate, not looking back. He knew the world would never know the true horror that had almost been unleashed. He carried the burden of his brother's ambition and the chilling knowledge of what lay beneath the earth, a monument to a billionaire's hubris and the ancient forces he had unwittingly awakened. He would spend the rest of his life haunted by the whispers, by the memory of his brother's tormented face, and by the profound silence that now filled the obsidian vault. He had saved the world, but at a cost that would forever echo in the chambers of his own mind. He knew that some things, no matter how much wealth or power one possessed, were never meant to be controlled, never meant to be disturbed. And some doors, once opened, could never truly be closed. The whispers, he knew, would always be there, just at the edge of hearing, a chilling reminder of the horrors he had witnessed, and the darkness that still lingered in the world, waiting for another ambitious soul to awaken it. The old house stood at the end of a long, winding dirt road, swallowed by a dense forest of whispering pines. Its paint peeled, and its dark windows seemed to watch Sarah and Mark as they pulled up. Sarah, with her rich, cocoa butter skin and coiled dreadlocks, shivered. Mark, fair-skinned and excited, squeezed her hand. "Isn't it perfect, babe?" he asked, his voice full of enthusiasm. "Remote, historic, and look at that view of the lake." Sarah tried to smile, but unease crawled up her spine. "It's certainly remote, Mark. Are you sure? Feels a little isolated." Mark laughed. "That's the point. No noisy neighbors, just us, the stars, and nature." A freelance writer, he sought quiet inspiration. Sarah, a graphic designer, loved the city but agreed for his sake. The real estate agent, Brenda, met them. "Welcome to the Whispering Pines. It's been in the Miller family for generations." Her eyes lingered on Sarah, a flicker of something unreadable, before turning to Mark. Inside, the air was cool and heavy, thick with old wood and something metallic, faintly sweet, like forgotten blood. Sarah dismissed it as decay. The furniture was antique, hinting at a grand past. The grand staircase stretched into gloom. As Brenda led them, Mark pointed out his study and the kitchen. Sarah's gaze was drawn to the deep shadows. A faint chill followed her. In the dining room, a massive table sat draped, and Sarah felt a sudden, intense sadness. Upstairs, the master bedroom was vast. Sarah felt a distinct cold spot near the window. "Is there a draft?" she asked. Brenda's smile tightened. "Old houses, dear. They have their quirks." She quickly moved them to a smaller bedroom where the air felt heavier. Sarah noticed a faint, reddish-brown stain on the wooden floor near the window. She quickly looked away. They signed the papers. Brenda handed them the ornate iron key. "Enjoy your new home," she said, "and do be careful. The woods around here can be a bit disorienting, especially after dark." Her gaze flickered to Sarah again, and this time, Sarah felt a definite chill. It was a look that seemed to hold a warning, or perhaps a judgment. The first few days were idyllic. Mark thrived in his study. Sarah set up her design station. They explored the grounds, finding a path to the lake. The isolation, initially unnerving, began to feel like a cocoon. But then the whispers started. At first, Sarah thought it was just the wind, a soft, indistinct murmur. But it was always there when she was alone, just at the edge of hearing. She'd pause, strain her ears, and it would vanish. "You hear that?" she'd ask Mark in bed. He'd look up, confused. "Hear what, babe?" "Just the crickets." She'd shake her head. "Nothing. Must be my imagination." Then came the footsteps. Light, hesitant steps, always from upstairs or the hallway. Too soft for Mark's, too rhythmic for the house settling. Sarah would lie awake, heart pounding, feeling a cold breath on her neck. One night, she woke to the distinct sound of a child crying, a soft, mournful wail. She nudged Mark. "Did you hear that?" He sat up, groggy. "Hear what? You having a nightmare?" "No." "A baby, crying." They listened. Only crickets. Mark sighed, pulling her closer. Just a dream, love. Go back to sleep. But Sarah felt his skepticism. It wasn't a dream. The next morning, Sarah saw a small, muddy footprint on the living room floor. Too small for an adult, too distinct to be a smudge and fresh. Her blood ran cold. "Mark!" she called, voice trembling. He came in. "What's wrong?" He stopped short, seeing the print. "Ha! A kid's shoe print. But how? Brenda said the house was empty for years," Sarah countered, voice tight. "And it's inside." He shrugged, trying to be nonchalant. "Probably just some dust. Or a squirrel." But his eyes betrayed his unease. The incident unsettled Sarah deeply. She started to feel watched. The shadows seemed to deepen, and the old house began to feel like a cage. She found herself constantly looking over her shoulder. The whispers grew louder, more distinct. They were voices, faint and distorted, like a chorus of sorrowful sighs. Sometimes she'd hear her name, or Mark's, whispered from an empty room. The words were fragmented, but carried immense despair. Mine, lost, taken. One afternoon, while Mark was writing, Sarah was sketching. The air suddenly grew heavy, oppressive. The scent of old blood returned, stronger, making her stomach churn. She looked up. Standing in the doorway to the dining room, shrouded in shadow, was a tall, gaunt figure. Its features were indistinct, but she saw the outline of a long, flowing dress and an old-fashioned bonnet. It seemed to shimmer. Sarah froze, heart leaping. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure didn't move, just stood there, a silent, menacing presence. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, leaving only the lingering scent of decay and a profound chill. Sarah scrambled up, knocking over her chair. She ran to Mark's study, bursting through the door, gasping. "Mark! Mark! I saw something. A ghost. I swear it." He looked up, startled, pale. "What? What happened?" "Sarah, you're white as a sheet." She tried to explain, words tumbling out, breathless, punctuated by sobs. A woman, in the dining room. A ghost, Mark. And the smell of blood. He held her, trying to calm her. Shoo. It's okay, babe. You're just stressed. Maybe you just saw a trick of the light." He tried to rationalize it, but Sarah saw the doubt in his eyes. He didn't believe her. That, almost as much as the apparition, terrified her. The incidents escalated. Objects moved. Doors creaked open and shut, sometimes slamming. The temperature in rooms plummeted. Sarah grew withdrawn, plagued by nightmares. Her appetite vanished. Mark seemed oblivious or determined to ignore it. He was thriving in the quiet. He attributed Sarah's distress to stress, subtly suggesting her imagination was working against her. His well-meaning attempts only made Sarah feel more alone. "Maybe we should go back to the city for a bit," Sarah pleaded one morning, eyes red-rimmed. "Just a weekend. I can't stay here, Mark. Something is wrong." Mark sighed, a hint of impatience. "Sarah, we just got here. My work is really taking off. This is what we wanted, remember? Peace and quiet. We can't just abandon everything." He didn't understand. His inability to grasp her terror felt like a chasm opening. The racial dynamic, subtle at first, began to surface. Sarah wondered if Mark's dismissal was partly because she was a black woman, often stereotyped as emotional. Would he believe her more readily if she were white? The thought was a bitter pill, adding isolation. One evening, as they ate dinner, the lights flickered violently. A cold gust of wind swept through the room. A chilling whisper, clear and distinct, echoed from the hallway. "Get out. Leave. He is mine." Mark dropped his fork. His eyes, wide with fear, finally met Sarah's. Did you hear that?" Sarah nodded, tears streaming, a mixture of relief and renewed terror. "Yes, Mark. Finally. Do you believe me now?" His face was ashen. "We need to call Brenda, or someone." They tried, but the phone lines were dead. The internet was down. They were truly isolated. Panic set in. They decided to leave immediately. They grabbed their bags, hearts pounding. As they rushed downstairs, a loud crash came from the living room. They looked in. The four-poster bed from the master bedroom, impossibly, stood in the middle of the living room, overturned, splintered. A guttural growl filled the air, vibrating through the floorboards. The temperature plummeted further, and the metallic, sweet smell became overpowering. What the hell is going on? Mark yelled, voice cracking. From the deepest shadows, a figure coalesced. It was the woman again, clearer, more terrifying, shimmering. Her face was gaunt, skeletal. Her eyes hollow pits of despair and burning fury. Her dress was an old, blood-stained wedding gown. In her arms, she cradled a small, tattered, blood-soaked blanket. A baby, a tiny, silent bundle. The child crying. The small footprint. It all clicked. The woman raised a skeletal hand, pointing directly at Sarah. Her voice, a rasping whisper, filled the room. She took him. She took my baby. They took him because he was different. Her gaze was fixed on Sarah, a raw, burning hatred. It wasn't just a ghost. It was a ghost consumed by specific, racialized grief and rage. Sarah understood. This wasn't just a haunted house. It was a house haunted by racial injustice, of a child taken because of his mixed heritage. Seeing Sarah, a black woman with a white partner, had ignited her ancient pain. Mark, seeing the ghost's fury, instinctively stepped in front of Sarah. Leave her alone. We don't know what you're talking about. The ghost let out a piercing shriek. The house began to shake violently. Pictures flew, glass shattered, furniture crashed, dust rained down. They took him because he was like her. The ghost wailed, voice growing stronger, more enraged. My beautiful boy, my innocent child. They wouldn't let me keep him. They said he was an abomination, a stain on their name. They took him to save their pure bloodline. Sarah's mind raced, piecing together the history. The Miller family, the South, racial prejudice. This white woman had a child with a black man, a forbidden union. The child was violently taken, perhaps killed, to preserve family honor. Seeing Sarah, a modern echo of her tragic love, ignited her rage. She wasn't just haunting the house. She was haunting the injustice, projecting her trauma onto Sarah. We have to go, Mark. Now. She's going to kill us. Sarah screamed, pulling him towards the door. They turned and ran, scrambling for the front door. The ghost lunged, a cold, spectral hand reaching for Sarah's ankle. Mark shoved her forward, breaking the ghost's grasp, and they burst out into the night. The storm had broken. Rain lashed down, turning the dirt road into a muddy river. Thunder cracked, and lightning illuminated the terrifying silhouette of the house, its dark windows like malevolent eyes. The pines shrieked. They stumbled to their car, fumbling with the keys. Mark jammed the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered, then roared. He slammed the car into reverse, tires spitting mud, and sped down the driveway. As they drove away, Sarah looked back. In the upstairs window, illuminated by lightning, stood the ghostly woman, holding her baby, her face a mask of eternal sorrow and rage. Beside her, a shadowy, indistinct man seemed to stand guard. Their faces were etched with torment. They didn't stop driving until they reached the nearest town. They found a motel. Inside, they collapsed, trembling, soaked, adrenaline drained. I can't believe that just happened, Mark whispered, voice hoarse. He looked at Sarah, eyes filled with terror and profound apology.
I am so sorry, Sarah.
I should have listened to you. Sarah reached for his hand. It's okay, Mark. We're safe now. But she knew it wasn't entirely okay. The experience had shaken them, exposing a raw nerve, a painful truth about the world, and how prejudice could manifest, even in the supernatural. They never went back to the Whispering Pines. They forfeited their deposit. The house, they learned from locals, had a dark history. A young Miller woman, early 1900s, fell in love with a black farmhand. They had a child, but the family, horrified, took the baby, giving him to an orphanage, and locked the woman in the house, where she died of grief. The farmhand disappeared. The house wasn't just haunted by a ghost. It was haunted by systemic racism, a pain so profound it transcended death. The ghost hadn't just seen two people. She had seen a painful echo of her own stolen love, her lost child, and her rage was directed at Sarah, who represented the forbidden union. Sarah and Mark returned to the city. They found a new appreciation for the noise, the crowds, the anonymity. The experience had changed them. Mark was more attuned to Sarah's instincts, more aware of subtle prejudice. Sarah, though haunted, felt renewed strength, a deeper understanding of historical weight. Their love, tested by fear and the past, emerged stronger, more resilient. They understood their bond was not just personal, but a quiet act of defiance against a world that had once, and sometimes still did, try to keep people like them apart. They carried the memory of the Whispering Pines, a chilling reminder, but also a powerful testament to love overcoming shadows. Their love was a beacon, a refusal to let history dictate their future. And that, in itself, was a victory. The wind, a skeletal hand, clawed at the ancient stones of the obsidian convent. It whistled through the broken lancet windows, a mournful dirge that had echoed through these hallowed, yet desolate, halls for centuries. Within, 3 figures moved through the deepening twilight, their bald heads gleaming faintly in the dying light, like polished river stones. Father Elias, the eldest, walked with a stoic, measured pace. His eyes, though clouded with age, missed nothing. His face, a roadmap of wrinkles, held an expression of perpetual, weary vigilance. Behind him, Father Benedict, younger and more robust, moved with a nervous energy, his gaze darting into the shadowed corners, his fingers often straying to the rosary beads tucked into his cassock. Bringing up the rear was Brother Thomas, the youngest, his baldness a recent, almost shocking revelation against his youthful features. He clutched a thick, leather-bound Bible, its pages worn smooth from countless readings, as if it were a shield against the encroaching darkness. They had been dispatched by the diocese, a reluctant, almost desperate measure, to investigate the obsidian convent. Whispers had reached the ears of the bishop, whispers of strange lights, unearthly wailing, and the chilling disappearance of the last 2 priests sent to oversee its restoration. The bishop, a man of modern sensibilities, had initially dismissed them as local superstitions, the ramblings of isolated villagers. But the disappearances were harder to ignore. "Are we sure this is the correct path, Father Elias?" Benedict's voice, usually firm, was thin with apprehension. The air grew colder with each step, carrying with it a scent that was both metallic and sweet, like old blood and decaying flowers. Elias paused, his gaze sweeping over the crumbling frescoes that depicted scenes of grim martyrdom. Their colors faded to ghostly hues. "The path is clear, Father Benedict. It is the destination that remains shrouded." He spoke with an unnerving calm, a man who had faced many shadows in his long life. Thomas shivered, pulling his cassock tighter around him. The villagers spoke of a presence, something that doesn't like visitors. "Superstition, brother," Elias replied, though his tone lacked conviction. "The convent has been abandoned for 50 years. Time and neglect are often mistaken for malevolent spirits." Yet, even as he spoke, a profound sense of unease settled upon them. The silence of the convent was not the peaceful quiet of an empty building, but a suffocating stillness, pregnant with unseen eyes and held breaths. Every creak of the ancient timbers, every rustle of the wind, seemed amplified, distorted into something sinister. They reached the main chapel, its grandiosity now a testament to ruin. The altar was overturned, its marble slab cracked down the middle. Stained glass windows, once vibrant, were shattered, leaving jagged teeth of colored glass in their frames. Dust, thick and ancient, lay like a shroud over everything. "By the saints," Benedict whispered, crossing himself. "What happened here?" Elias knelt, his fingers tracing a deep gouge in the stone floor near the altar. "Not neglect, Father," This was deliberate. As he spoke, a faint, rhythmic scratching began to emanate from behind the altar. It was soft at first, like mice in the walls, but it grew steadily, becoming louder, more insistent, like nails dragging across stone. Thomas gasped, his eyes wide with terror. "What is that?" Elias rose slowly, his hand instinctively going to the crucifix hanging from his neck. "Stay close." They moved as one, their footsteps echoing hollowly in the vast space towards the source of the sound. Behind the altar, a small, hidden door, almost invisible against the dark wood paneling, stood ajar. A cold, damp draft seeped from within, carrying with it the metallic sweet scent, now overwhelmingly strong. The scratching intensified, now accompanied by a low, guttural moan. "It sounds like something alive," Benedict stammered, his face pale. Elias pushed the door open further. Beyond lay a narrow, winding staircase, plunging into absolute darkness. The scratching and moaning seemed to pull them in, a macabre siren song. "We must investigate," Elias stated, his voice firm, though a tremor ran through it. Thomas, despite his fear, felt a surge of resolve. "I'll go first, Father. I have the lamp." He held aloft a small, flickering oil lamp he had brought. Its weak light barely pierced the oppressive gloom. Down they went, the air growing heavier, colder, the scent more pungent. The stairs were uneven, slick with an unseen moisture. The scratching and moaning were now directly below them, a constant, horrifying presence. Suddenly, Thomas cried out. His foot had slipped. He tumbled, the lamp flying from his grasp. It shattered against the stone, plunging them into absolute darkness. "Thomas, are you all right?" Benedict's voice was sharp with panic. A choked gasp was Thomas's only reply. Then, a sickening thud, and silence. "Thomas!" Elias called out, his voice laced with urgency. He fumbled in the darkness, his hand brushing against something cold and slick. He recoiled. A faint, phosphorescent glow began to emanate from the depths below. It pulsed erratically, illuminating fleeting glimpses of the staircase. And then a horrifying sight. Thomas lay sprawled at the bottom of the stairs, his body twisted at an unnatural angle. His eyes were wide open, staring blankly upwards, but it wasn't his vacant gaze that chilled them to the bone. It was what was on his face. Something had been at him. His skin was flayed in places, revealing raw, glistening muscle. His mouth was stretched into a silent scream, and from his throat, a dark, viscous liquid seeped. And then, the scratching began again, closer now, accompanied by a wet, slurping sound. "Dear God!" Benedict whimpered, scrambling backward up the stairs. Elias, despite the horror, remained rooted. The phosphorescent glow intensified, revealing the source of the scratching. It was a creature, hunched and grotesque, its form indistinct in the pulsing light. It was feeding on Thomas. Its skin was a sickly gray, stretched taut over a skeletal frame. Long, needle-like claws scraped against the stone as it moved. Its head was disproportionately large, with no discernible features save for a gaping maw filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. And its eyes were two glowing, malevolent orbs, fixed on Elias. "Run, Father Benedict!" Elias roared, finally breaking from his trance. Benedict didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled up the stairs, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Elias, however, stood his ground. He knew with a terrible certainty that this creature would not let them leave. He raised his crucifix, his voice, though trembling, ringing with unexpected power. "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, I command the foul abomination to return to the abyss from whence you came." The creature paused, its slurping ceasing. It let out a low, guttural hiss, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. It uncoiled, rising to its full, terrifying height. It was taller than any man, its limbs impossibly long and spindly. Elias began to recite the litany of saints. his voice growing stronger with each invocation. The creature shrieked, a sound that tore at the very fabric of the air, and lunged. Benedict, reaching the top of the stairs, heard the shriek, then a sickening wet thud, followed by a choked cry. He didn't look back. He couldn't. He burst through the hidden door, slammed it shut, and fumbled for a way to bar it. His hands, slick with sweat, struggled with a heavy wooden beam that lay nearby. He managed to wedge it against the door, his heart pounding like a drum against his ribs. He stood there, panting, leaning against the cold stone wall, listening. The sounds from below had ceased. Only the mournful wind through the convent now. He was alone. Panic, cold and sharp, began to set in. He was trapped in this accursed place, with whatever had taken Elias and Thomas lurking in its depths. He had to escape. He stumbled through the chapel, the images of Thomas's mutilated body and the creature's glowing eyes seared into his mind. He reached the main entrance, pulling at the heavy, rusted doors. They groaned, resisting his efforts. He pushed with all his might, his muscles screaming in protest. Finally, with a deafening screech of metal, one of the doors scraped open enough for him to squeeze through. He burst out into the night, gasping for breath, the cold air a shock against his burning lungs. He didn't stop running until he reached the edge of the forest, the obsidian convent a dark, menacing silhouette against the moonlit sky. He collapsed, sobbing, his body racked with tremors. He had to warn the bishop. He had to tell them what truly lurked within the obsidian convent. Days later, a search party, heavily armed and accompanied by several grim-faced priests, arrived at the convent. Father Benedict, still pale and haunted, led them, though he refused to go within sight of the building itself. They found no trace of Father Elias or Brother Thomas. No bodies, no blood, nothing. It was as if they had simply vanished into thin air. The hidden door behind the altar was gone, replaced by solid, unblemished wood paneling. The gouge in the floor was no longer there. The convent, in the harsh light of day, seemed merely old and dilapidated, not malevolent. The search party, unnerved by Benedict's frantic, disjointed account and the lack of any physical evidence, concluded that he had suffered a mental breakdown, perhaps hallucinating due to stress and the isolation of the convent. They offered him comfort, but their eyes held a flicker of pity and disbelief. Benedict knew the truth. He knew what he had seen. He knew what had become of his brothers. But how could he prove it? The convent had erased all traces of its horrors. He returned to his monastery, a broken man. He rarely spoke, and when he did, his words were often fragmented, filled with references to glowing eyes and the metallic sweet scent. His once robust frame withered, his hair, what little he had left, turned stark white. He spent his days in the chapel, praying incessantly, his gaze fixed on the crucifix, as if seeking protection from an unseen terror that still pursued him. Years passed. The obsidian convent remained abandoned, its reputation growing darker with each passing season. Villagers continued to report strange lights and wailing, but no one dared venture close. It was a place best left undisturbed, a tomb for secrets best left buried. Benedict, now an old man, was confined to the infirmary, his mind ravaged by the horrors he had witnessed. He would often wake in the dead of night, screaming, his hands clawing at his throat, whispering, "The scratching, the scratching." One stormy night, as the wind howled like a banshee around the monastery, Benedict's screams reached a fever pitch. The attending nurse rushed to his side, but it was too late. His eyes were wide with terror, his mouth agape in a silent scream, just like Brother Thomas's. And from his throat, a dark, viscous liquid seeped. The nurse, a devout woman, crossed herself, her face pale. She noticed something else, something that made her blood run cold. On Benedict's bald head, faint, almost imperceptible, were thin, red lines, as if something had been dragged across his scalp. The next morning, the monastery was abuzz with hushed whispers. The official cause of death was attributed to a sudden heart attack, a merciful end to a troubled life. But the nurse knew better. She had seen the lines. She had smelled the faint, metallic sweet scent that clung to the air in Benedict's room. She looked out the window, towards the distant, dark silhouette of the obsidian convent, now almost swallowed by the driving rain. A shiver ran down her spine. Some secrets, she realized, refused to stay buried. Some horrors, once awakened, never truly sleep. And sometimes, the very act of escaping a nightmare only postpones the inevitable. The obsidian convent, it seemed, had a way of reclaiming its own. The three bald priests, in their valiant, yet ultimately futile, attempt to confront its darkness, had merely become another part of its chilling legend. The wind, still a skeletal hand, continued to claw at the ancient stones, a mournful dirge for those who dared to listen too closely. The sun, a malevolent eye in a sky the color of bleached bone, beat down on the parched earth. Dust devils danced in the distance, mocking mirages of movement in a landscape that seemed to have forgotten the meaning of life. Jedediah Jed Stone, a man whose face was a roadmap of sun-baked wrinkles and hard-won wisdom, squinted ahead, his hand instinctively resting on the worn grip of his Colt Peacemaker. Beside him, young Billy Bones O'Malley, all gangly limbs and nervous energy, shifted in his saddle, his eyes darting from one featureless horizon to the next. They were 2 days out from Redemption Gulch, a town whose name was as ironic as the hope it offered. Their last job, a cattle drive gone sour thanks to a flash flood, had left them with little more than the clothes on their backs and a thirst for something stronger than creek water. Now, they were cutting across a stretch of land known only as the Devil's Backbone, a desolate, forgotten corner of the Arizona Territory that even the Apaches largely avoided. "You sure this is the quickest way to Fort Apache, Jed?" Billy asked, his voice a little too high, a little too strained. The silence that followed his words was thick, broken only by the rhythmic creak of leather and the dull thud of hooves on the baked ground. Jed grunted, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "Ain't no quickest way out here, Bones. Just a way. And this one saves us a week of riding through rattlesnake country." He didn't sound entirely convinced himself. A strange stillness had settled over the land since they'd entered this stretch. The usual desert sounds, the chirping of crickets, the rustle of lizards, the distant cry of a hawk were absent. It was as if the very air held its breath. As the afternoon wore on, the silence grew heavier, pressing in on them. The horses, usually stoic, began to whicker nervously, their ears swiveling, their eyes wide. Jed, a man who trusted animal instinct more than any map, felt a prickle of unease crawl up his spine. "Easy boy," he murmured to his roan, Patches, stroking the horse's neck. "What is it?" They rode into a canyon as the sun began its slow, agonizing descent, painting the sky in hues of blood orange and bruised purple. The canyon walls, jagged and dark, seemed to close in around them, swallowing the last vestiges of light. A chill wind, carrying the scent of dust and something else, something ancient and unsettling, snaked through the narrow pass. "Hear that, Jed?" Billy whispered, pulling his rifle from its scabbard. Jed strained his ears. First, he heard nothing but the wind. Then, a faint, high-pitched keening, like a child weeping, seemed to echo from the canyon walls. It rose and fell, a mournful, disembodied sound that made the hairs on Jed's arms stand on end. "Just the wind, Bones," Jed said, though his voice lacked conviction. He knew the wind. This was different. This sound had a voice, a sorrowful, chilling quality that spoke of suffering. They pressed on, the sound growing louder, more distinct. It wasn't just weeping now. It was interspersed with low, guttural growls, and something that sounded like dry, rasping whispers. The horses were skittish, dancing sideways, their eyes rolling. Suddenly, Patches reared, whinnying in terror. Jed fought to control him, his boots scraping against the stirrups. "Whoa, boy! What in the blazes?" A shadow detached itself from the deepening gloom ahead. It was tall, impossibly thin, and moved with a jerky, unnatural gait. It wasn't human. The silhouette was wrong, too elongated, too angular. As it drew closer, Jed could make out a faint, phosphorescent glow emanating from its form, like decaying bone. Billy screamed, a raw, terrified sound. He fired his rifle wildly, the shot echoing deafeningly in the confined space. The creature didn't flinch. It merely paused, its head tilting at an unnatural angle, as if listening. The keening intensified, joined by a chorus of the dry whispers, swirling around them like a sandstorm of malevolent voices. "Run, Billy! Ride!" Jed roared, spurring Patches forward, not caring where they went, only that it was away from that. They galloped blindly through the twilight, the terrifying sounds pursuing them, seeming to emanate from the very air around them. Jed glanced back. The creature was gone, swallowed by the shadows, but the whispers remained, a chilling symphony of unseen tormentors. They rode until their horses were lathered and heaving, until the canyon walls gave way to a flat, featureless plain under a sky now peppered with indifferent stars. They dismounted, trembling, their hearts hammering against their ribs. What was that, Jed?" Billy stammered, his face ashen. Jed shook his head, pulling out his canteen and taking a long swig. "Don't know, Bones. Don't want to know." He looked around. The plain was eerily quiet again, but the memory of the keening and the whispers clung to the air like a shroud. They made a cold camp, too unnerved to light a fire that might draw unwanted attention. Jed kept his rifle across his lap, his eyes scanning the darkness. Every rustle of dry brush, every distant hoot of an owl, sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. As the moon climbed higher, casting long, distorted shadows, Jed heard it again. A faint whisper, right beside his ear. It wasn't English, or Spanish, or Apache. It was a language of clicking sounds and hisses, utterly alien, yet filled with a palpable malice. He whipped his head around. Nothing. Billy was asleep, or pretending to be, curled up in his bedroll, shivering. Jed gripped his rifle tighter. He'd faced outlaws, stampedes, and angry grizzlies, but this was different. This was something that preyed on the mind, something that whispered secrets only the dead should know. The night dragged on, an eternity of unseen eyes and unheard sounds. Jed swore he saw shapes moving in the periphery of his vision, tall and gaunt, flitting between the sparse cacti. He heard the distinct sound of footsteps, light as dust, circling their camp. But whenever he looked directly, there was nothing. When the first sliver of dawn painted the eastern sky, Jed felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. He hadn't slept a wink. Billy stirred, groaning, then sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Morning, Jed," he mumbled. Then his eyes widened as he took in Jed's haggard appearance. "You look like you wrestled a ghost." "Maybe I did, Bones," Jed muttered, standing stiffly. "Let's get moving. Now." They packed up in silence, the unspoken terror of the night hanging heavy between them. As they rode away, Jed glanced back at their campsite. In the dust, around where they had slept, he saw faint, elongated impressions, like the tracks of some impossibly long, skeletal fingers dragging through the sand. His blood ran cold. They rode north, away from the Devil's Backbone, pushing the horses harder than they should. The sun rose, burning away the last vestiges of night's fear, replacing it with the familiar, comforting heat of the desert. But the sense of unease persisted. By midday, they stumbled upon an old, abandoned homestead. A single, dilapidated shack stood crookedly, its windows like vacant eyes, its door hanging ajar. A dry well, its stone rim cracked, gaped nearby. "Maybe we can get some water here," Billy said, his voice hopeful. Jed hesitated. The place felt wrong. The air around it was heavy, stagnant, as if time itself had died here. But their canteens were nearly empty, and the horses were flagging. "All right," Jed conceded, dismounting cautiously. "But keep your eyes open." They approached the shack. The silence here was even more profound than in the canyon. No birds, no insects, just the faint creak of the shack's timbers in the hot breeze. Jed pushed the door open further with the barrel of his rifle. Inside, dust lay thick on everything. A table and 2 chairs, covered in a fine layer of grime, stood in the center of the single room. A rusted stove sat in one corner, but it was the walls that drew Jed's eye. Scratched into the rough-hewn wood were symbols, crude, angular lines, spirals, and what looked like distorted human figures. They were everywhere, covering every inch of the wall space, as if someone had spent their last days in a frantic, desperate attempt to record something. "What in tarnation are these?" Billy whispered, tracing one of the symbols with a trembling finger. Jed felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. He'd seen similar symbols before in old Apache burial grounds, but these were different. These felt corrupted, malignant. Then he saw it. On the floor, near the stove, was a pile of desiccated bones. Not animal bones. Human. A skull, cracked and yellowed, stared up at them, its empty eye sockets seeming to hold an ancient horror. Beside it, a rusted tin cup and a diary, its leather cover brittle and flaking. Jed knelt, his hand shaking slightly as he picked up the diary. The pages were fragile, but the ink, though faded, was still legible. He opened it to a random page. The handwriting was frantic, sprawling, as if written by a hand possessed by madness. "Read it, Jed," Billy urged, his voice barely a whisper. Jed cleared his throat, his eyes scanning the page. The whispers, they never stop. They tell me things, horrible things. They say I'm not alone. They say they're waiting, always waiting. They came from the ground, from the darkness beneath the backbone. They want everything. Jed flipped to another page. My wife, she heard them too. She tried to leave. They wouldn't let her. They made her change. Her skin, it peeled. Her eyes, they glowed. She became one of them. She whispers now, always whispers. A cold sweat broke out on Jed's brow. He looked at the skull, then at the symbols on the wall. He remembered the keening, the dry whispers, the impossibly thin shadow in the canyon. I tried to fight. My rifle, useless. They are not flesh. They are hunger. They feed on fear. They feed on despair. They want to spread, to consume the light, the sun. It hurts them, but the night is theirs. Jed dropped the diary as if it were a burning coal. He scrambled backward, bumping into Billy. Jed, what is it? Billy's voice was laced with terror. We gotta go, Bones. Now, this place, it's cursed. They stumbled out of the shack, gasping for breath, as if the air inside had been poisoned. As Jed mounted Patches, he heard a faint, dry whisper from inside the shack. It sounded like a name, his name. They rode hard, leaving the homestead behind, but the words from the diary echoed in Jed's mind. They feed on fear. They feed on despair. He looked at Billy, whose face was a mask of pure terror. They were both feeding it. The sun began its descent again, and Jed felt a fresh wave of dread. Night was coming, their enemy's time. They found a small cave, little more than an overhang, as dusk settled. It offered meager protection, but it was better than nothing. Jed gathered some dry brush, determined to light a fire this time, despite the risk. The thought of another night in the dark, with only the whispers for company, was unbearable. As Jed struck a match, a low, guttural growl emanated from deeper within the cave. Both men froze. What was that? Billy whispered, his eyes wide with fear. Jed slowly raised his rifle, aiming into the darkness. Stay behind me, Bones. A pair of glowing, malevolent eyes materialized in the blackness, followed by another and another. They weren't animal eyes. They were too large, too intense, burning with an unnatural, cold light. Then a shape emerged. It was similar to the one they'd seen in the canyon, but larger, more defined. Its limbs were too long, too spindly, ending in clawed hands that scraped against the rock floor. Its head was small, almost vestigial, but the glowing eyes dominated its face. Its skin, if it could be called that, was a mottled gray, like dried mud, and seemed to shimmer faintly. It moved with a sickening, disjointed motion, like a puppet whose strings were being pulled by a madman. The air grew cold, and the whispers returned, swirling around them, louder now, more insistent. They seemed to press into Jed's mind, trying to pry open his deepest fears. "You are alone. No one will find you. You are ours." Jed fired. The shot roared in the confined space, deafening them. The creature shrieked, a sound like grinding stone, and recoiled, but it wasn't harmed. The bullet passed through it, leaving no mark. "It's not flesh, Jed," Billy cried, tears streaming down his face. "It's what the diary said." The creature lunged, its clawed hand reaching for Billy. Jed tackled Billy, pushing him out of the way just as the claws raked across the rock where he'd been standing, leaving deep gouges. "The sun," Jed yelled, remembering the diary's words. "It hurts them. We need light." He frantically threw the dry brush onto the ground, striking match after match. The creature paused, its glowing eyes fixed on the sparks. It seemed hesitant, its movements slowing. Finally, a small flame caught, then another and another. The dry brush ignited, casting a flickering, orange glow into the cave. The creature hissed, recoiling further into the shadows, its glowing eyes narrowing. The whispers became a furious, frustrated cacophony. Jed kept feeding the fire, pulling more brush from outside the cave. The flames grew, pushing back the darkness, and with it, the creatures. They stayed at the edge of the firelight, their forms barely visible, their whispers a constant, maddening drone. They spent the night huddled by the fire, Jed reloading his rifle, Billy sobbing quietly. The creatures never left, their glowing eyes watching from the darkness, their whispers a relentless assault on their sanity. As dawn approached, the creatures began to recede, their forms dissolving into the pre-dawn gloom. The whispers faded, replaced by the first chirping of crickets and the distant call of a desert bird. When the sun finally crested the horizon, bathing the land in its golden light, the cave was empty. The air was still cold, but the oppressive weight was gone. Jed and Billy emerged, exhausted but alive. They mounted their horses, their movements stiff, their minds reeling. They didn't speak, just rode, leaving the devil's backbone behind them for good. They reached Fort Apache a day later, looking like specters. The soldiers at the gate stared at their gaunt faces, their haunted eyes. They tried to explain, but the words sounded hollow, insane. They spoke of things that weren't flesh, of whispers that stole sanity, of creatures that fed on fear. The soldiers just nodded, exchanged knowing glances, and offered them a hot meal and a bed. They'd seen men come out of the desert broken before. Jed and Billy never spoke of what they saw again, not to anyone else. But the whispers never truly left them. They heard them in the rustle of leaves, in the sigh of the wind, in the silence of the night. They saw the glowing eyes in the darkest corners of their minds. Billy, once so full of nervous energy, became withdrawn, his gaze distant, his laughter rare. He eventually settled down, took up farming, and rarely ventured far from his homestead. He built his house with thick walls and kept a lamp burning in every window at night. Jed, the hardened cowboy, found himself unable to stay in one place for long. He drifted from town to town, always looking over his shoulder, always listening. He never rode through desolate lands again, always sticking to the well-worn trails, preferring the company of men, no matter how rough, to the terrifying solitude of the wilderness. He carried the memory of the whispers, a chilling echo in his soul. He knew what lurked in the forgotten corners of the world, in the places where the sun dared not linger. And he knew that some horrors, once seen, could never be unseen. The devil's backbone was just one such place, a wound in the earth where ancient, hungry things stirred, waiting for the night, waiting for the fear, waiting for the next unlucky souls to wander into their domain. And sometimes, on the darkest nights, Jed swore he could still hear them, calling his name, promising to return. the echoes of retribution. The fluorescent lights of Northwood High hummed, a sickly yellow glow that did little to dispel the gloom that clung to its hallways. For Liam, every day was a descent into that gloom, a slow, agonizing suffocation orchestrated by one person, Mark Thorne. Mark wasn't just a bully. He was a force of nature, a hurricane of cruelty wrapped in a Letterman jacket. His smile, when it wasn't a sneer, was a predatory flash of white teeth. His eyes, cold and calculating, missed nothing. Liam, with his quiet demeanor, his worn textbooks, and his aversion to confrontation, was Mark's favorite target. It started subtly, as these things often do. Shoves in the hallway, tripping him during lunch, accidentally spilling milk on his homework. Then it escalated. Lockers slammed shut on his fingers, whispered threats in the bathroom. His backpack emptied into the overflowing toilet. The worst was the psychological torment. The relentless taunts about his stutter, his worn clothes, his dead-end future. Mark had a knack for finding the rawest nerves and pressing down with all his might. Liam tried to avoid him. He took circuitous routes to class, ate his lunch in the library, and walked home the long way, even in the rain. But Mark was like a shadow, always there, always finding him. The teachers, when they noticed, offered platitudes or a stern word to Mark that he simply shrugged off, a smirk playing on his lips. The other students, terrified of becoming Mark's next victim, looked away, their silence a heavy cloak of complicity. One particularly brutal Tuesday, Mark cornered Liam in the deserted art room after school. Liam had been working on a charcoal drawing for his portfolio, a detailed landscape that was his escape, his solace. Mark, flanked by his two hulking cronies, Jake and Tyler, surveyed the room with disdain. "Look what we have here," Mark drawled, his voice dripping with mock sweetness. Little Liam playing Picasso. He snatched the drawing from the easel, his fingers smudging the delicate charcoal. Liam's breath hitched. "Please, Mark, don't." Mark laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Don't what, cry? You're always crying, aren't you, Liam? Such a baby." He crumpled the drawing into a tight ball, then tossed it into a bucket of murky paint water. Liam felt a cold, hard knot form in his stomach. It wasn't just the drawing. It was the destruction of something he poured his soul into, something that represented his last shred of dignity. A flicker of something dark, something dangerous, ignited within him. "You'll regret that," Liam whispered, his voice barely audible, but laced with an unusual venom. Mark paused, his smirk faltering for a fraction of a second. "What was that, nerd? You gonna cry me a river?" Liam looked at him, his eyes, usually downcast, now burning with an intensity that made even Mark uncomfortable. "You'll regret every single thing you've done to me," he repeated, louder this time. "Every shove, every insult, every tear." Mark scoffed, but a seed of unease had been planted. "Whatever, freak. Let's go, guys." They left, their laughter echoing down the hall, but Liam's words lingered in the air, a strange, chilling prophecy. That night, Liam couldn't sleep. The crumpled drawing, now a soggy mess, lay on his desk. He stared at it, the anger and humiliation churning inside him. He thought of all the times he'd wished Mark would just disappear, wished for some cosmic justice. And then, an idea, cold and unsettling, began to take root. He remembered an old book his grandmother, a woman who dabbled in forgotten folklore, had kept hidden away. It spoke of ancient rituals of invoking something. He had dismissed it as nonsense, but now, fueled by despair and a desperate need for retribution, he pulled it from its dusty hiding place. The book was bound in dark, cracked leather, its pages brittle and yellowed. He found a section marked Echoes of the Unseen. It spoke of drawing upon the residual emotions of a place, of shaping them, giving them form. It was dangerous, the text warned, irreversible. But Liam was beyond caring about danger. He followed the instructions meticulously, his hands trembling. He gathered a lock of his own hair, a piece of the ruined drawing, and a small, tarnished silver locket that had belonged to his great-grandmother. a woman rumored to have a second sight. He performed the ritual in the dead of night, the only light a flickering candle, its flame dancing with every whisper of the wind outside. He focused all his pain, his fear, his burning desire for Mark to feel what he had felt, into the small, symbolic effigy he created. "Let the echoes rise," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "Let the torment return to its source." The next morning, an unsettling quiet hung over Northwood High. Mark Thorne wasn't at school. Rumors spread like wildfire. He was sick. He was suspended. He'd moved. No one knew for sure. A collective sigh of relief swept through the student body, quickly followed by a nervous apprehension. It was too good to be true. Liam felt a strange mix of relief and a chilling sense of dread. Had it worked? Was it just a coincidence? The answers began to manifest that afternoon. Mark's phone, usually buzzing with texts and calls, was silent. His parents, initially relieved at his illness, grew increasingly concerned. Mark was withdrawn, pale and unresponsive. He sat in his room, staring at the walls, his eyes wide with an unidentifiable fear. Then the whispers started. Only Mark could hear them at first. Soft, insidious murmurs, like 1,000 voices speaking just beyond his ear. They spoke his name, twisted it into a mocking hiss. They repeated phrases he had used, insults he had flung, but now they were amplified, distorted, imbued with the pain of his victims. "Crybaby," a child's voice would whisper from the corner of his room. "Worthless," a woman's voice would sigh from behind his closet door. "Freak," a chorus of voices would chant from beneath his bed. Mark tried to tell his parents, but they dismissed it as a feverish delusion. He tried to ignore it, to drown it out with music, but the whispers seeped through, burrowing into his mind, relentless. Then came the apparitions. They were fleeting at first, shadows in his peripheral vision. A hunched figure darting across the hallway, a pale face peering from behind a curtain. Then they grew bolder. He'd see a small, weeping boy sitting on his bed, only for it to vanish when he blinked. He'd catch a glimpse of a girl, her face contorted in silent scream, reflected in his mirror. One night, he woke to a chilling sensation. Something was pressing down on his chest, heavy and cold. His eyes snapped open. Hovering above him, its face a blur of distorted features, was a figure. It wasn't solid, but a shimmering outline, like heat haze, yet terrifyingly real. It leaned closer, and a voice, 1,000 voices merged into one, boomed inside his head, not with sound, but with pure, raw emotion. "You will feel what they felt." Mark screamed. His parents rushed in, finding him thrashing in bed, drenched in sweat, his eyes wide with terror. They took him to doctors, therapists, but no one could explain what was happening. He wasn't hallucinating. He was experiencing something beyond their comprehension. The echoes grew stronger. The whispers became shouts. The apparitions more vivid, more tangible. He saw the faces of every person he had ever tormented, their eyes filled with accusation, their mouths moving in silent curses. He felt the phantom pain of every shove, every punch, every humiliation he had inflicted. He tried to leave his room, but the house itself seemed to turn against him. Doors slammed shut, lights flickered wildly. The air grew thick with a palpable dread. The faces of his victims appeared in every shadow, their silent pleas and accusations haunting his every step. One evening, Liam was in the library, a rare moment of peace. The school had moved on, the Mark Thorne incident fading into an unsettling anecdote. But Liam knew. He felt a faint, almost imperceptible hum in the air, a resonance, a distant echo. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. It was a news alert. Local teen hospitalized after apparent mental breakdown. The accompanying picture was blurry, but Liam recognized the pale, haunted face of Mark Thorne. The article spoke of him being found in a catatonic state, muttering incoherently about voices and shadows. Liam felt no triumph, only a deep, unsettling chill. The ritual had worked. The echoes had found their way home. Days turned into weeks. Mark was transferred to a specialized facility. The reports were grim. He was unresponsive, trapped in a waking nightmare, perpetually haunted by the specters of his past cruelty. He would scream at empty corners, flinch from unseen hands, and sometimes he would just weep, a hollow, broken sound. Liam, meanwhile, found a fragile peace. The quiet hum he sometimes felt was a reminder, a subtle resonance of the cosmic balance being restored. He still walked the long way home, but now it was out of habit, not fear. The shadows in the hallways of Northwood High seemed less oppressive. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howled outside his window, Liam would hear it. A faint, distant whisper, carried on the breeze. It wasn't the torment of the walls, but something else. Something that sounded suspiciously like a faint, guttural laugh, followed by a choked sob. And he wondered if the echoes, once awakened, ever truly faded. He wondered if, in some dark corner of the world, a part of Mark Thorne would always be listening, forever trapped in the retribution he had so carelessly invited. The silence, for Liam, was no longer just the absence of sound. It was the heavy, pregnant pause before the next echo. The summer of '97 was supposed to be like any other in Oakhaven. Long, sun-drenched days stretched into twilight, filled with the buzzing symphony of cicadas and the distant, joyful shouts of children. The heart of Oakhaven, for most of its younger residents, was Willow Creek Pond, a shimmering expanse of water fringed by weeping willows and a rickety old wooden dock. It was there that 12-year-old Leo, with his perpetually scraped knees and boundless curiosity, spent his days, usually accompanied by his best friend, Maya, a girl whose quick wit was as sharp as her braided pigtails. They weren't alone, of course. The pond was a hub of activity. Dragonflies danced over the surface, frogs croaked from the reeds, and a small flock of ducks, plump and preening, glided serenely, occasionally waddling onto the grassy bank to beg for breadcrumbs. Among them was one particular duck, larger than the rest, with iridescent green feathers on its head that shimmered like polished emeralds. The kids called him Emerald, and he was a local favorite, always the first to waddle up for a handout. His quack's a deep, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate in your chest. But as July bled into August, a subtle shift began. It started small, almost imperceptible. Emerald, once a friendly fixture, began to linger. His emerald eyes, once simply bright, seemed to hold an unnatural intensity. He would watch the children, not with the hopeful expectation of a treat, but with a fixed, unblinking gaze that sent a shiver down Leo's spine. "He's staring," Maya whispered one afternoon, pulling her hand back from a half-eaten sandwich she'd been about to offer. Emerald was on the bank, a good 10 feet away, his head cocked, those green eyes locked onto them. He wasn't quacking, wasn't moving, just watching. Leo, ever the pragmatist, scoffed. "He wants food, Maya. You're being silly." But even as he said it, a prickle of unease crawled up his neck. Emerald's stillness was unnerving. The next day, the staring escalated. Emerald followed them, not just to the edge of the pond, but along the path that led back to town. He kept a steady, unnerving pace, his webbed feet slapping softly on the dirt, those eyes never leaving them. When they sped up, he sped up. When they stopped, he stopped. It was like a grotesque game of follow the leader. "This isn't normal," Maya insisted, her voice tight with fear as they practically sprinted the last 100 yards to Leo's house. They burst through the door, breathless, and tried to explain to Leo's mom about the weird duck. She chuckled, ruffling Leo's hair. "Oh, that old Emerald? He's probably just hungry, sweetie. Ducks can be persistent." She dismissed their frantic warnings with the easy disbelief of an adult who hadn't seen the unblinking, predatory stare. Their parents' dismissal only fueled their growing terror. Emerald wasn't just persistent. He was malevolent. The quacks, once deep and resonant, now sounded guttural, almost a growl. One evening, as Leo walked home alone, the air grew suddenly cold. A shadow detached itself from the deepening dusk, moving with impossible speed. It was Emerald, his body a blur, his quacks echoing like a distorted scream. Leo ran, his heart hammering against his ribs, not daring to look back. He heard the frantic flapping of wings, the slapping of webbed feet, closer, closer. He stumbled through his front door, slamming it shut, collapsing against it, gasping for air. Through the peephole, he saw nothing but the empty street, the streetlights casting long, dancing shadows. But he felt it, a lingering chill, a sense of eyes on him. The kids started avoiding the pond, but Emerald didn't stay confined to Willow Creek. He started appearing in their yards, on their streets, always watching, always waiting. Once, Maya woke up to a faint tapping at her window. Her room was on the second floor. She peered through the curtains, and there, perched impossibly on her windowsill, was Emerald, his green eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. He let out a low, raspy quack that sounded less like a bird and more like a whisper from a nightmare. Maya screamed, and her parents rushed in, finding nothing but an open window and a terrified daughter. "It's the duck, isn't it?" Leo said to Maya the next day, their faces pale as they huddled in the dusty confines of the Oak Haven Public Library. They were in the local history section, poring over old newspaper clippings and dusty town records. Maya nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "He's not just a duck, Leo. He can't be." They found it in a brittle yellow journal, tucked away in a box marked Uncategorized Local Lore. It was written in a shaky, spidery hand, dated 1888. The entry spoke of a quacker demon, a malevolent spirit that took the form of a large duck, terrorizing the children of Oak Haven during a particularly hot summer. It spoke of unnatural speed, glowing eyes, and a terrifying, soul-chilling quack. The journal entry ended abruptly, the last few lines smeared as if the writer had been interrupted. But one sentence was clear, underlined multiple times. "The only way to banish it is with the sound of pure, unblemished joy, amplified by the chime of the old church bell." The church bell. Leo frowned. "That's crazy. What else could it be?" Maya countered, her finger tracing the faded words. "It fits everything. The glowing eyes, the chasing, and the joy part. Maybe it hates happiness." Their fear now had a focus, a desperate, improbable plan. The old Oak Haven church bell hadn't been rung in decades. The church itself was still standing, but it was mostly used for storage, its steeple leaning precariously, its bell silent. The attacks grew bolder. Emerald no longer just watched. He actively pursued. During a bike ride through the quiet streets, Emerald burst from behind a hedge, his quack a deafening roar that seemed to vibrate through their very bones. He flapped his wings, a powerful gust that nearly knocked Leo off his bike. His beak, once soft and innocuous, seemed to stretch, revealing rows of tiny, needle-sharp teeth. They pedaled like mad, their legs burning, the demon duck a relentless green blur behind them. They could hear the thwack, thwack, thwack of his webbed feet on the asphalt impossibly fast. One afternoon, as they walked past the abandoned old mill, a place notorious for its creaking timbers and shadowy corners, Emerald appeared in the doorway, his eyes blazing. He wasn't just a duck. He was a hulking, feathered nightmare, his shadow stretching long and distorted behind him. His quack was a guttural shriek that scraped against their eardrums. "We have to do it," Maya said, her voice trembling but resolute. "Tonight, the church bell." They planned their assault with the meticulousness of seasoned generals. They gathered everything they thought they would need: a flashlight, a rusty wrench to pry open the church door, and a small, portable cassette player. On the cassette, they'd recorded the sound of children laughing, pure, unadulterated joy from a schoolyard field day. It was a long shot, but it was all they had. That night, under a sky choked with heavy, bruised clouds, they crept towards the old Oak Haven church. The air was thick with humidity, a pre-storm stillness that amplified every rustle of leaves, every distant dog bark. The church loomed, a skeletal silhouette against the bruised sky, its bell tower a dark finger pointing accusingly at the heavens. The rusted lock on the side door groaned, but eventually gave way under Leo's determined prying with the wrench. Inside, the church was a tomb of dust and shadows. Moonlight filtered through the grimy stained glass windows, casting distorted, colorful patterns on the cobweb-draped pews. The air was heavy with the scent of old wood and decay. "Up there," Maya whispered, pointing her flashlight beam towards the rickety wooden stairs leading to the bell tower. Each step creaked ominously under their weight, the sound echoing through the cavernous space. They climbed, their hearts pounding in unison, the silence broken only by their ragged breathing and the occasional drip of water from a leaky roof. As they reached the top landing, a sudden, piercing quack ripped through the air, impossibly loud, impossibly close. It was a sound that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality, a sound born of pure malice. Emerald was there, perched on the railing of the bell tower, his green eyes glowing with an infernal light. He was larger than they had ever seen him, his feathers bristling, his beak agape, revealing a horrifying maw. He looked less like a duck and more like a feathered gargoyle, a creature of pure nightmare. "He knew," Leo gasped, stumbling back. "He's been waiting," Maya whispered, her face pale. The demon duck lunged, a blur of green and black. Leo shoved Maya out of the way just as Emerald's razor-sharp beak sliced through the air where her head had been. They scrambled, Leo fumbling with the cassette player, his fingers clumsy with terror. Emerald let out another ear-splitting quack, a sound that made the very timbers of the tower tremble. He flapped his powerful wings, creating a gale that whipped dust and cobwebs around them. "The bell, Leo! Get to the bell!" Maya screamed, dodging another lunge, her small body surprisingly agile. Leo scrambled towards the massive, rusted bell, its surface pitted and green with age. He could see the thick, heavy rope hanging down, almost within reach. Emerald was on them, his eyes fixed, a predatory glint in their depths. His quacks were now a continuous, guttural roar, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, Leo grabbed the bell rope. It was thick and rough, chafing his hands. He pulled, putting all his weight into it. The bell groaned, a low, metallic protest, then began to swing, slowly at first, then gaining momentum. "The music!" Maya yelled, finally getting the cassette player to work. The cheerful, innocent sound of children's laughter, tinny but clear, filled the air. The moment the laughter hit Emerald, he recoiled, his quacks faltering, replaced by a sound like sizzling steam. He shrieked, a sound of agony and fury, his glowing eyes flickering. Leo pulled the rope again, harder this time. The bell swung higher. Clang! The sound vibrated through the tower, a deep, resonant tone that seemed to shake the very foundations of the old church. It was a sound of immense power, a sound that cut through the demon's shrieks. Emerald shrieked again, a sound of pure, unholy pain. The laughter from the cassette player, combined with the booming chime of the bell, seemed to tear at him. His form began to waver, his feathers dissolving into wisps of green and black smoke. His glowing eyes dimmed, then vanished. He let out one final, agonizing quack, a sound of utter despair, and then, with a final violent shudder, he exploded into a cloud of black smoke that dissipated into the night air. The laughter from the cassette player continued, now sounding almost triumphant. The bell, still swinging, let out another deep, echoing clang. Silence descended, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder. Leo and Maya stood panting, covered in dust and sweat, their bodies trembling, but alive. They had done it. They had banished the quacker demon. They stumbled out of the church, the first drops of rain beginning to fall. The world seemed brighter, cleaner, as if a great weight had been lifted. They didn't tell their parents the full story, knowing they wouldn't be believed, but a silent understanding passed between them, a bond forged in shared terror and unlikely triumph. The summer ended, and life in Oak Haven slowly returned to its gentle rhythm. The pond was once again a place of innocent joy, the ducks waddling peacefully, begging for bread. But sometimes, when the wind whispered through the willows just so, Or when a lone duck's quack echoed a little too loudly across the water, Leo and Maya would exchange a look. A look that said, "We know." And sometimes, just sometimes, when the moon was full and the night was still, Leo swore he could hear it. A faint, distant, guttural quack, carried on the wind, a chilling reminder that some shadows, once awakened, never truly disappear. And he knew, deep in his bones, that Emerald, the demon duck, was just waiting for the next summer to begin. The rotor blades beat a furious rhythm against the storm-lashed sky, a desperate struggle against the unseen forces tearing at their small, private helicopter. Inside, the silence was thick with unspoken resentments, a stark contrast to the howling wind outside. The Miller family, Robert, the patriarch, his estranged wife, Sarah, and their two teenage children, Liam and Chloe, were on their way to a remote family therapy retreat, a last-ditch effort to mend the gaping fissures that had swallowed their once-united home. Robert, ever the pragmatist, gripped the armrests, his knuckles white. He'd insisted on this trip, believing the isolation would force them to confront their issues. Now, as the helicopter bucked violently, he wondered if he'd simply delivered them into a different kind of abyss. Sarah, pale and drawn, stared out at the swirling gray, her lips moving in a silent prayer. She'd opposed the idea, preferring the familiar comfort of their suburban home, however fractured. Liam, headphones clamped over his ears, was lost in a world of defiant music, his eyes fixed on the flickering instruments of the cockpit. Chloe, younger and more vulnerable, huddled in her seat, clutching a worn teddy bear, tears silently tracing paths down her cheeks. A sudden, jarring lurch threw them against their restraints. The pilot, a grizzled man named Captain Davies, wrestled with the controls, his face a mask of grim concentration. "Turbulence!" he barked over the roar. "Worst I've seen in years." Then came the sound. Not the wind, not the rotors, but a high-pitched metallic shriek, followed by a sickening thud. The helicopter shuddered, dropping like a stone. A warning light flared red on the console. "Engine failure," Davies yelled, his voice strained with panic. "We're going down." Chaos erupted. Robert lunged for Sarah, pulling her close. Liam ripped off his headphones, his eyes wide with terror. Chloe screamed, a raw, primal sound that cut through the mechanical death throes of the aircraft. The world outside became a blur of green and gray as they plummeted. Trees rushed up to meet them, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for their demise. The last thing Elias heard before the impact was the shattering of glass, the tearing of metal, and the collective, desperate cry of his family. Then, darkness. He awoke to the stench of aviation fuel and damp earth. Pain, a searing, all-encompassing agony, ripped through his left arm. Groaning, he pushed against something heavy, realizing it was the twisted wreckage of his seat. He was upside down, dangling precariously. "Sarah, Liam, Chloe." His voice was hoarse, raw with fear. A faint moan answered him. "Dad?" It was Liam, his voice weak. "Liam, are you okay?" Robert struggled, his vision swimming. He could see the mangled remains of the cockpit, the pilot's seat empty. Captain Davies was gone. "My leg. I think it's broken," Liam whispered. "Sarah? Chloe?" Robert called again, desperation clawing at his throat. Silence. A terrifying, absolute silence, broken only by the drip of fuel and the distant whisper of the wind. He managed to unbuckle himself, falling awkwardly onto the damp jungle floor. The air was thick with the smell of crushed vegetation and something else, something metallic and acrid. He fumbled for his phone, but it was shattered. He crawled towards Liam, who was pinned under a section of the fuselage, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. "Hold on, son. I'll get you out." It took agonizing minutes, pushing and pulling at the jagged metal, his injured arm screaming in protest. Finally, with a grunt, he freed Liam. The boy cried out, then slumped against his father, his face ashen. "Mom? Chloe?" Liam mumbled, his eyes darting around the wreckage. Robert's heart hammered. He scanned the debris, The torn seats, the scattered luggage. They must have been thrown clear. The words felt hollow even to him. They began to search, Liam hobbling, leaning heavily on Robert. The jungle was a suffocating maze, the darkness intensified by the thick canopy. The helicopter had crashed into a ravine, its pieces scattered amongst the dense undergrowth. "Mom!" Liam called out, his voice cracking. "Chloe!" A sound, a low guttural growl. Both men froze. "What was that?" Liam whispered, his eyes wide. "I don't know," Robert said, his voice barely audible. He remembered the stories of this remote region, of the creatures that roamed its depths. They pressed on, calling out, their voices swallowed by the oppressive silence. Then Robert saw it, a flash of color. Sarah's bright red scarf, snagged on a thorny bush. He rushed forward, his heart pounding. And then he saw her, Sarah, lying motionless, half buried under a fallen tree branch. Her eyes were closed, her face peaceful, too peaceful. "Mom!" Liam cried, collapsing beside her. He reached out, his hand trembling, and touched her cold cheek. "No, no." Robert knelt, tears blurring his vision. The family was broken, truly broken now. As Liam sobbed, a rustle in the undergrowth caught Robert's attention. He looked up. Two luminous, yellow eyes stared back at him from the darkness. A puma. Its sleek, powerful body was barely visible, but its predatory gaze was unmistakable. It had been drawn by the crash, by the scent of blood and fear. "Liam," Robert whispered, "we have to go. Now." Liam, lost in his grief, didn't respond. Robert grabbed his son's arm, pulling him. "Liam, we have to move." The puma took a step forward, a low growl rumbling in its chest. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, Robert dragged Liam away from Sarah's body, deeper into the tangled undergrowth. They moved slowly, painfully, Liam's injured leg making every step an agony. The puma followed, a silent, relentless shadow. They stumbled through the night, the growls of the puma echoing around them, sometimes close, sometimes distant, a constant reminder of their precarious existence. Robert knew they couldn't outrun it. They needed shelter. He spotted a small cave, a dark maw in the side of a rocky outcrop. "In here," he urged Liam. They scrambled inside, pressing themselves against the cold, damp rock. The puma stopped at the mouth of the cave, its eyes glowing in the darkness. It paced, a restless, powerful presence, its growls reverberating through the small space. "Where's Chloe?" Liam whispered, his voice hoarse. "We have to find Chloe." Robert closed his eyes, a fresh wave of despair washing over him. He hadn't seen Chloe since the crash. The thought was unbearable. Hours passed. The puma remained, a patient, deadly sentry. Robert knew they couldn't stay in the cave forever. They would starve, or the puma would eventually find a way in. He thought about their family, about the arguments, the distance that had grown between them. He thought about Chloe, her bright smile, her innocent laughter. A fierce, protective instinct surged through him. He had to find her. "We're going to make a run for it," Robert whispered to Liam. Liam looked at him, fear and exhaustion etched on his face. "But the puma? We have no choice," Robert said, his voice firm. "We have to find Chloe." He found a sturdy branch, thick and heavy, and gripped it like a club. "When I say go, we run as fast as you can. Straight ahead." Liam nodded, his jaw set. Robert took a deep breath. "Now!" They burst from the cave, Liam limping, Robert swinging the branch wildly. The puma was caught off guard, leaping back with a snarl. They ran, blindly, desperately, through the darkness. The puma recovered quickly, its powerful strides closing the distance. Robert heard its heavy breathing behind them, felt the rush of air as it lunged. He swung the branch, connecting with something solid. A yelp of pain. They didn't stop. They kept running, the sounds of the jungle closing in around them. And then, a faint light, flickering through the trees. "A fire!" Liam gasped, hope surging through his voice. They stumbled towards it, crashing through the undergrowth. As they drew closer, they saw a small, makeshift camp and a figure huddled by the fire. "Chloe!" Robert roared, his voice raw with emotion. Chloe looked up, her face streaked with dirt and tears, but her eyes wide with recognition. "Dad! Liam!" She ran to them, throwing her arms around Robert. Then Liam. She was alive. She had survived. I built a fire," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I was so scared." Robert held her tight, tears streaming down his face. They were bruised, injured, and heartbroken, but they were alive. And for the first time in a long time, the fractured family felt a fragile sense of unity, forged in the crucible of shared terror. The puma's growls still echoed in the distance, a reminder of the jungle's unforgiving nature, but for now, they had found each other in the darkness. The sky was the color of bruised plums, a sickly, ominous hue that swallowed the last vestiges of twilight. Inside the aging minivan, the air was thick with the scent of stale coffee, nervous sweat, and the faint, metallic tang of fear. Mark gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, his eyes darting between the rearview mirror and the rapidly darkening horizon. Beside him, Sarah clutched her phone, its screen a flickering beacon displaying a Doppler radar map that looked less like weather and more like a monstrous, swirling maw. In the back, 10-year-old Lily whimpered softly, her face pressed against the window, and her older brother, 15-year-old Ethan, tried to project an air of detached cool, but his rigid posture and wide, unblinking eyes betrayed his terror. "It's gaining on us, Mark." Sarah's voice was a tight, panicked whisper. "The radar shows it's picked up speed. We should have gone to the shelter." "There wasn't time, Sarah." By the time the sirens went off, it was already too close. "This is the fastest way out of its path." His voice was strained, each word a battle against the rising tide of adrenaline. He knew she was right in a way. They had hesitated, dismissed the earlier warnings as overblown, and now they were paying the price. A sudden, violent gust of wind slammed into the minivan, rocking it violently. Lily cried out, and Ethan instinctively pulled her closer. The trees lining the highway bent and swayed like drunken giants, their branches thrashing against the darkening sky. Debris, small at first, began to whip across the road, leaves, twigs, then larger pieces of what looked like shredded insulation. "Stay calm, kids." Mark tried to reassure them, his voice cracking. "We're almost out of it, just a little further." But the lie tasted bitter on his tongue. He could see it now, even without the radar. A dark, churning column, indistinct against the bruised sky, but undeniably there. It was a monstrous, ethereal serpent, descending from the heavens, its tail lashing out, tearing at the earth. The radio crackled, then a frantic voice broke through the static. "Seek immediate shelter. Repeat, seek immediate shelter." Large, destructive tornado confirmed on the ground, moving rapidly towards Highway 67. "Turn it off," Sarah shrieked, pressing a trembling hand to her mouth. "Just turn it off." Mark slammed his hand against the radio, silencing the terrifying broadcast. The only sounds now were the roar of the wind, the drumming of rain against the windshield, and the ragged breaths of his family. The minivan felt fragile, a tin can against the fury of nature. He pushed the accelerator to the floor, the old engine groaning in protest. The road ahead was a blurry tunnel of rain and wind, visibility dropping to almost zero. He squinted, trying to make out the faint glow of the taillights of the car ahead, their only guide through the maelstrom. Suddenly, the car ahead swerved violently, its brake lights flashing erratically. Then it disappeared into the swirling curtain of rain. Mark slammed on his own brakes, the minivan skidding precariously. "What was that?" Ethan yelled, his voice laced with genuine fear now. "I don't know," Mark shouted back, trying to regain control of the vehicle. He could feel the tires losing traction, hydroplaning on the waterlogged asphalt. He fought the wheel, wrestling the van back into a straight line. A terrifying sound ripped through the air, a low, guttural roar that vibrated through the very chassis of the minivan. It was the sound of the tornado, closer now, a living, breathing entity. It was a sound that spoke of unimaginable power, of destruction on an epic scale. "It's right behind us," Lily screamed, pointing a trembling finger out the back window. Mark risked a glance in the rearview mirror. The world behind them was a swirling vortex of black and gray, illuminated by flashes of lightning. He could see trees being ripped from the ground, houses dissolving into splinters, cars tossed like toys. The funnel cloud was enormous, a terrifying, beautiful, and utterly destructive force. "Hold on," he yelled, pushing the accelerator again, desperate for speed. The minivan lurched forward, fighting against the wind that seemed determined to push it sideways. The rain turned to hail, huge chunks of ice hammering against the roof and windshield, sounding like 1,000 tiny hammers. Cracks spiderwebbed across the glass. "My window!" Lily cried, as a large hailstone shattered a corner of her side window, sending shards of glass scattering across the back seat. Ethan quickly pulled her away from the window, shielding her with his body. Sarah was crying openly now, her face pale and streaked with tears. "We need to find shelter, Mark. We can't outrun it," she pleaded, her voice choked with sobs. "There's nothing, just open fields," he retorted, his voice raw with desperation. He knew she was right, but what choice did they have? Pull over and face it head-on? That was suicide. The minivan was buffeted again, this time more violently. It lifted slightly off the ground, then slammed back down with a sickening jolt. The tires squealed, fighting for purchase. "We're going to flip," Ethan screamed, bracing himself. Mark fought the wheel, his muscles aching, his arms burning. He could feel the van being pulled, dragged by an unseen hand. The roar of the tornado was deafening now, a primal scream that filled the entire world. Suddenly, the wind seemed to lessen, just for a moment. The rain eased, and the hail stopped. Mark risked another glance in the rearview mirror. The funnel cloud was still there, a terrifying presence, but it seemed to have veered slightly to the left, tearing a path through the distant fields. "It's changing direction," Sarah gasped, pointing at the radar on her phone. "It's moving away," a wave of relief, so profound it almost buckled his knees, washed over Mark. They had made it. They were safe. He slowed the minivan, pulling off to the side of the road, his hands still trembling on the wheel. He turned off the engine. The silence that followed was almost as terrifying as the roar of the tornado. He turned to look at his family. Sarah was slumped in her seat, sobbing uncontrollably. Ethan was holding Lily tightly, both of them shaking. "Are you all okay?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. Ethan gave a shaky thumbs up. Lily just buried her face in her brother's shoulder. They sat there for a long time, the four of them, huddled together in the battered minivan, watching the receding storm. The sky was still bruised, but the monstrous serpent was now a distant, fading shadow. As the last vestiges of the tornado disappeared into the horizon, a new sound filled the air, the wail of emergency sirens, growing louder as they approached. Help was coming. Mark knew they were lucky, incredibly, impossibly lucky. They had faced the raw power of nature and survived. But the images of the swirling black cloud, the flying debris, the sheer, unadulterated terror would be etched into their minds forever. They had outrun the sky serpent, but the chase would haunt their dreams for years to come. The silence of the aftermath was filled with the echoes of what they had escaped, a chilling reminder of how close they had come to being swallowed by the storm. The research outpost, nestled deep within the impenetrable canopy of the Viridian jungle, was a monument to human ambition and scientific hubris. Dr. Eris Thorne, a primatologist whose reputation bordered on legendary, had dedicated his life to understanding the great apes. His current obsession was the elusive shadow apes, a species rumored to possess intelligence far beyond any known primate, their existence confined to the darkest, most isolated pockets of the jungle. For 6 months, Thorne and his small team, the pragmatic botanist, Dr. Lena Petrova, the quiet, observant field assistant, Ben Carter, and the perpetually nervous communications specialist, Sarah Jenkins, had been tracking them. The jungle itself was a living, breathing entity. Its symphony of chirps, roars, and rustles a constant reminder of its untamed power. But lately, the symphony had changed. A new sound had crept in, a low, rhythmic thrumming that seemed to vibrate through the very earth, often accompanied by a faint, almost subliminal chittering. It wasn't the usual calls of the jungle. It was something ancient, something unsettling. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered one evening, her eyes wide, as the thrumming intensified, seeming to emanate from the dense foliage just beyond their perimeter fence. Thorn, ever the scientist, adjusted his night vision goggles. "Probably just a new territorial call, Sarah. The jungle is full of surprises." But even he felt a prickle of unease. This sound was different. It had a hypnotic quality, a primal resonance that stirred something deep within. The first direct encounter with the shadow apes was not what they expected. They had set up a new observation blind near a cluster of rare bioluminescent fungi, hoping to catch a glimpse of the nocturnal creatures. What they saw, illuminated by the ghostly glow, was not a family group foraging, but a single massive ape. It stood upright, its fur a deep, charcoal black. Its eyes, even in the dim light, seemed to possess an unnatural depth, a chilling intelligence. It wasn't just observing the fungi, it was studying them, its long, powerful fingers tracing patterns on the glowing caps. Then it turned its head. Its gaze swept over their blind, pausing for a beat that felt like an eternity. There was no aggression, no fear, just a profound, unsettling awareness. And then it let out a low, guttural chitter, a sound that seemed to ripple through the air, carrying with it a strange, almost musical quality. It wasn't a warning. It was something else, something that resonated in their very bones. Lena, usually unflappable, clutched Thorn's arm. "Did you see its eyes, Eris? They weren't animal eyes." Thorn nodded, a cold knot forming in his stomach. He had seen that look before, in the eyes of the most brilliant minds he had ever known. It was the look of profound thought. Over the next few days, the encounters became more frequent, more unnerving. The shadow apes were no longer just elusive creatures. They were observers, their dark forms appearing silently at the edge of the camp, their intelligent eyes watching every move. The rhythmic thrumming and chittering grew louder, more pervasive, seeping into their dreams, twisting their thoughts. Ben, usually the most grounded of the team, began to exhibit strange behavior. He would sit for hours, staring blankly into the jungle, occasionally muttering to himself in a language that sounded like the apes' chittering. He started sketching intricate, geometric patterns in his notebook, patterns that resembled the bioluminescent fungi, but with an added, unsettling complexity. "Ben, are you all right?" Lena asked him one morning, touching his shoulder. He flinched, his eyes unfocused. They're trying to tell us something, Lena," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "The patterns, the sounds. It's a language, a very old language." Thorn dismissed it as jungle fever, a common ailment among researchers. But a part of him, a growing, terrified part, knew it was something far more sinister. The thrumming was getting stronger, more insistent, and he felt a strange pull towards it, a desire to understand the silent messages it carried. One night, Sarah woke up screaming. She claimed she saw a shadow ape at the foot of her bed, its eyes glowing faintly, its chittering filling her head. Thorn found her huddled in a corner, trembling, her mind clearly unraveling. He administered a sedative, but the image of her terror-stricken face stayed with him. The next morning, Ben was gone. His tent was empty, his gear untouched, save for his notebook, left open to a page filled with the complex geometric patterns, now drawn with an almost obsessive precision. A single, dark handprint, too large to be human, was pressed firmly onto the page. Thorn organized a search party, but the jungle seemed to swallow them whole. The thrumming was now a constant presence, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated in their chests, making their teeth ache. Lena, usually so rational, began to argue with Thorn, her voice sharp, her eyes holding a strange, distant quality. She insisted that Ben hadn't been taken, but had gone to them, that he was learning. The truth, when it finally revealed itself, was far more horrifying than any fever dream. Thorn, driven by a desperate need to find Ben, followed the increasingly loud thrumming. It led him to a clearing he had never seen before, a place where the trees grew in unnatural, symmetrical formations. Their branches intertwined to form a vast, living dome. Beneath the dome, a chilling tableau awaited him. Dozens of shadow apes, their black fur gleaming in the faint, filtered light, were arranged in a perfect circle. In the center, sitting cross-legged, was Ben. His eyes, now glowing with the same pale blue light Thorn had seen in the apes, were fixed on a large, pulsating crystal embedded in the ground. The crystal hummed, emitting the very thrumming sound that had plagued them for weeks. Ben looked up, his face serene, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Welcome, Eris." His voice echoed, not from his mouth, but directly in Thorn's mind, clear as a bell, yet undeniably alien. "You have found us." Thorn felt a cold dread seize him. "Ben, what is this?" "This is understanding," Ben's mental voice replied. "This is the true path. The apes, they are not primitive. They are the guardians of ancient knowledge, channeled through this crystal, through the very fabric of the jungle." He gestured to the apes around him. Their eyes glowed, mirroring the crystal's light. They were not just watching. They were projecting, their collective consciousness merging, creating the pervasive hum that had slowly, insidiously taken hold of the research team. "They have been guiding us," Ben continued, his voice devoid of his former nervousness, "guiding us to shed the chaos of human thought, to embrace the unity of the primal mind." Thorn saw it then. The geometric patterns Ben had been drawing were not random. They were diagrams of neural pathways, blueprints for mind control. The chittering was not a language of sounds, but a language of thought, a direct mental link. The shadow apes were not just intelligent. They were telepathic, and they were using their abilities to subtly, slowly, absorb the minds of the humans who dared to intrude upon their ancient domain. "They want to assimilate us?" Thorn projected back, his own thoughts a jumble of fear and disbelief. "Assimilate is a crude word," Ben's voice hummed. "We become one mind, one purpose. Imagine the peace, Eris. No more doubt, no more conflict, only harmony." As he spoke, the thrumming from the crystal intensified, and Thorn felt the familiar pressure in his head, the creeping lassitude. He fought it desperately. He thought of Sarah, terrified and broken. He thought of Lena, her mind already subtly altered. He thought of the vibrant, chaotic, beautiful individuality of humanity.
No.
Thorn screamed, his voice a raw, desperate sound that seemed to shatter the serene silence of the clearing. He lunged, not at Ben, but at the pulsating crystal. The shadow apes reacted instantly, their chittering rising to a furious crescendo, their glowing eyes narrowing. They moved with impossible speed, a blur of black fur and powerful limbs. Thorn felt a searing pain as one of them raked its claws across his arm, but he ignored it, his gaze fixed on the crystal. He reached the crystal, its surface warm and slick beneath his fingers. He pulled, desperately, with all his strength. The crystal resisted, vibrating violently, its humming turning into a high-pitched shriek that pierced his ears. The apes were on him, their powerful hands grabbing, pulling. With a final, agonizing surge of adrenaline, Thorn ripped the crystal from the earth. A blinding flash of blue light erupted, followed by a deafening crack that echoed through the jungle. The thrumming ceased abruptly. The shadow apes froze, their glowing eyes dimming, their chittering dying into confused whimpers. Ben collapsed, his body going limp, the pale blue light fading from his eyes. Thorn scrambled away, clutching the now inert crystal, his arm bleeding profusely. The apes, disoriented, began to scatter, melting back into the shadows of the jungle. He found Lena later, wandering aimlessly back towards the outpost, her eyes wide and confused, the strange, distant look gone. She was disoriented, but her mind, he hoped, was intact. Sarah was still sedated, but he knew the road to recovery would be long. They abandoned the outpost, leaving behind their research, their ambition, their hubris. The jungle, once a place of scientific wonder, was now a place of profound, chilling terror. Thorn kept the crystal. It was dull now, its light extinguished, its humming silent. But sometimes, when the jungle wind whispered through the trees, or when a distant, unfamiliar call echoed through the night, he would feel a faint tremor in his hand, a phantom vibration from the crystal. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the shadow apes were still out there, their ancient knowledge waiting, their primal echo still resonating in the deep heart of the jungle, waiting for the next intrusion, waiting to resume their silent assimilation. The horror wasn't just in what they could do, but in the chilling realization that humanity's quest for knowledge had led them to a form of intelligence that sought not to communicate, but to consume. The air in the closet was thick with the scent of mothballs and forgotten dreams. Arthur huddled amongst the hanging clothes, his knees drawn to his chest. A trembling hand clamped over his mouth to stifle the ragged gasps that threatened to betray him. Outside, the house was a symphony of soft, deliberate sounds, the creak of floorboards, the whisper of fabric, the almost imperceptible drag of something heavy across the carpet. Eleanor. He had been in here for what felt like an eternity, though his watch, when he dared to glance at it in the sliver of light filtering through the crack beneath the door, stubbornly insisted it had only been 27 minutes. 27 minutes since the porcelain vase, a wedding gift from his aunt, had shattered against the wall inches from his head. 27 minutes since Eleanor's eyes, usually a placid blue, had hardened into chips of ice, reflecting a madness he'd only ever glimpsed in the darkest corners of his nightmares. It had started subtly, as these things often do, a misplaced set of keys escalating into a furious accusation of sabotage, a burnt dinner leading to a week of silent, simmering resentment. Then the whispers, at first barely audible, then growing louder, directed at unseen figures in the corners of rooms. He tried to talk to her, to suggest help, but each attempt was met with a chilling smile and a dismissive wave of her hand. "You worry too much, Arthur. It's just stress." But it wasn't stress. It was a creeping, insidious decay of her mind, and he, foolishly, had stayed, hoping to weather the storm, to find the Eleanor he loved buried beneath the layers of delusion. He should have left weeks ago, months ago, when the first shard of doubt pierced his heart. Now he was trapped. A soft thud echoed from the bedroom. He flinched, pressing himself further into the musty embrace of his winter coats. It sounded like a book falling, or perhaps something heavier. Was she searching? What was she looking for? Him, most likely, or perhaps something to use. He remembered the glint of the carving knife from dinner, how she'd held it just a moment too long, her gaze distant, unfocused. He'd dismissed it then, a trick of the light, his own overactive imagination. Now the memory was a cold, hard knot in his stomach. The floorboards outside the closet creaked again, closer this time. He could almost feel her presence, a suffocating weight on the other side of the thin wooden door. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to regulate his breathing, to slow the frantic drumbeat of his heart. Every inhale felt like a siren, every exhale a betraying sigh. "Arthur!" Her voice, when it came, was a soft, melodic hum, utterly devoid of the rage that had just moments ago contorted her features. It was the voice she used when she wanted something, when she was trying to lure him into a false sense of security. It was the voice that now terrified him more than any scream. "Are you playing hide and seek, darling?" He remained motionless, a statue carved from fear. He could feel the dust motes dancing in the faint light, each one a tiny, silent witness to his terror. The air grew heavier, colder, as if her madness had seeped into the very atmosphere of the room. "You know I don't like it when you hide," she continued. her voice still sweet, but with an underlying current of something sharp, like a razor's edge. He heard the rustle of clothing, the clink of hangers. She was in the closet, just not his side of it. The master bedroom had 2 large, walk-in closets, one for him, one for her, separated by a thin wall of drywall and a shared sense of dread. He heard her humming now, a nursery rhyme, off-key and distorted. It was a lullaby she used to sing to herself when she was stressed, a habit he'd once found endearing. Now it was a prelude to something terrible. A sudden, sharp rap on the wall beside him made him jump, his head hitting the back of the closet with a dull thud. He bit back a cry, his eyes watering. "Found you," she sang, her voice a little louder, a little closer. He knew she hadn't found him. Not yet. She was just playing, toying with him. This was her game, and he was the mouse. He remembered the cat she'd had as a child, a cruel tabby that would catch birds and play with them, batting them around, before finally delivering the killing blow. Eleanor had watched, fascinated, her small face devoid of emotion. He'd dismissed it then as childish curiosity. Now he saw the pattern. He heard her footsteps move away from the shared wall, towards the main door of the bedroom. A click, then the soft groan of the door opening. Was she leaving? Was it over? His hopes soared, then plummeted. She wouldn't leave. Not yet. She enjoyed this too much. He heard her talking now, her voice muffled, as if to someone else. "He's being naughty, you see. He doesn't want to come out and play." Play? What did she mean by play? His mind raced, cataloging every unsettling incident, every strange comment. The way she'd meticulously cleaned the antique silver last week, polishing each piece until it gleamed, then arranging them in a perfect, unsettling circle on the dining table. The way she'd stared at him during dinner, her fork poised midair, a faint, unreadable smile playing on her lips. A sudden, jarring crash from downstairs. He almost cried out. It sounded like a heavy piece of furniture had been overturned. What was she doing? Was she destroying the house? Or was it a distraction? He waited, listening, his ears straining against the silence that followed the crash. The humming started again, closer this time, accompanied by the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of something hard against the wooden floor. Tap, tap, tap. It was slow, deliberate, each tap echoing in the claustrophobic space of the closet, a morbid countdown. He imagined her, walking slowly, methodically, around the room, tapping whatever object she held. A cane? A hammer? The carving knife? His imagination, fueled by terror, supplied 1,000 gruesome possibilities. The tapping stopped directly outside his closet door. His breath hitched. He could feel the vibrations through the floorboards. She was there, right there. "Arthur," she whispered, her voice barely audible through the wood, yet it resonated in his bones. "I know you're in there." He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to become one with the coats, to disappear into the shadows. He wished he could stop breathing, stop existing, just for a moment, until she passed. "It's not fair, you know," she continued, her voice taking on a wounded, childlike quality. "You always hide from me, and I just want to talk." Talk? He scoffed internally. Talk meant accusations, threats, perhaps even violence. He remembered the bruise on his arm, a fading purple, from when she'd accidentally slammed the kitchen door on him, or the time she'd slipped and pushed him down the stairs. Each incident had been carefully framed as an accident, her eyes wide and innocent, her apologies saccharine sweet. A faint scratching sound. He tensed. Was she trying to pry open the door? He heard a soft sniffle, then a sob. Was she crying? Was this another one of her tricks? He knew her tears were often more dangerous than her rage. They disarmed him, made him drop his guard, only for her to strike when he was vulnerable. "I just want to tell you something, Arthur," she whimpered, her voice thick with feigned sorrow. "Something important." He didn't respond. He couldn't. His throat was a dry, constricted tunnel. "I found it," she said, her voice suddenly clear, devoid of the earlier sadness. A chilling note of triumph laced her words. "The key." His blood ran cold. The key. What key? The spare key to the house? The key to his study? Or the key to the closet door? He hadn't even known there was a key to the closet. It had always been unlocked. A metallic click. His heart leaped into his throat, pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. He heard the faint jingle of keys, then the scrape of metal against wood. No, this couldn't be happening. The doorknob rattled, then slowly, agonizingly, began to turn. He scrambled backward, deeper into the closet, his hands flailing, knocking against the rough fabric of his suits. He wanted to scream, to kick, to fight, but his body was paralyzed by a primal terror. The door creaked open, just a crack at first, then wider. A sliver of light pierced the darkness, illuminating the dust motes in a terrifying dance. He could see the edge of her floral dressing gown, the delicate lace trim. "Peek-a-boo," she whispered, her voice a sing-song, childlike tone that sent shivers down his spine. He squeezed his eyes shut again, bracing himself for the inevitable. He could feel the cold draft from the open door, the sudden rush of air. Then silence. He waited, his muscles screaming, his breath held captive in his lungs. Had she gone? Was this another cruel trick? He slowly, cautiously opened one eye. The door was still open, a narrow gap, but she wasn't there. He heard her footsteps receding, moving away from the closet, towards the bed. He heard the soft rustle of sheets, the creak of the mattress. Was she getting into bed? Was it over? Had she forgotten him? He risked opening both eyes. The closet was still dark, but the sliver of light from the bedroom was gone. The door was closed, not latched, not locked, just closed. He let out a shaky breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He was safe, for now. He waited, listening intently. The house was utterly silent now, save for the frantic thumping of his own heart. He slowly, painstakingly, began to unfold himself from his cramped position, his limbs stiff and protesting. He reached out a trembling hand and pushed gently against the closet door. It opened with a soft sigh. The bedroom was dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of the streetlights filtering through the curtains. He could see the outline of the bed, the rumpled sheets. Eleanor was there, lying perfectly still, facing away from him, her back to the door. She seemed to be asleep. He crept out of the closet, moving with agonizing slowness, each step a calculated risk. He needed to get out of the room, out of the house, out of her reach. He tiptoed towards the bedroom door, his eyes fixed on Eleanor's still form. He was almost there, just a few more steps. As he reached for the doorknob, a soft voice broke the silence, sending a fresh wave of terror through him. "You know, Arthur," she said, her voice calm, clear, and utterly devoid of sleepiness. "I never liked that vase anyway." He froze, his hand inches from the knob. He didn't dare turn around. "It was so ordinary," she continued, her voice thoughtful. "Not like us, is it? We're special, unique." He could hear her shifting in the bed, the rustle of sheets. Was she getting up? "But you," she said, her voice dropping to a low, intimate whisper. "You're my favorite toy." He heard the distinct click of a lighter. A faint orange glow illuminated the room for a split second, revealing Eleanor, sitting up in bed, a small, knowing smile on her face. In her hand, she held not a lighter, but a small, silver-plated pistol, the same one his father had kept in his study, the one he'd taught Arthur to shoot with years ago, the one he thought was safely locked away. "And I don't like it when my toys run away," she said, her smile widening, her eyes glinting in the faint light. He didn't wait. He threw open the door and bolted, down the stairs, towards the front door, the sound of her laughter echoing behind him, a chilling melody of madness and despair. He didn't know if he would make it, but he knew one thing. He would never, ever hide in a closet again. The air hung thick and humid, a suffocating blanket woven from the breath of a million unseen leaves. Elias stumbled, his boot catching on a gnarled root, sending a jolt of pain up his shin. He barely registered it. His heart was a frantic drum against his ribs, each beat echoing the primal terror that had seized him moments ago. The jungle, usually a symphony of chirps and rustles, had fallen into an unnatural, chilling silence, broken only by the ragged gasps that tore from his own throat. He had been foolish, so terribly foolish, driven by a thirst for a rare orchid, a specimen rumored to glow faintly in the deepest shadows. He had ventured too far, too deep, and stayed too long. Now, the sun had long since dipped below the canopy, plunging the world into a darkness so profound it felt like a physical weight. The moon, a sliver of bone-white light, offered no solace, its feeble rays swallowed whole by the dense foliage. It had started subtly, a twig snapping not under his own foot, but somewhere close, too close. Then, the distinct, musky scent, an odor of raw power and untamed wilderness that prickled the hairs on his neck. Elias had frozen, his breath held captive in his lungs, straining his ears against the oppressive quiet. He told himself it was just a boar, perhaps a deer, anything but what his instincts screamed. Then came the eyes, two luminous, emerald orbs, piercing the absolute blackness from a distance he couldn't gauge. They were low to the ground, unblinking, radiating an intelligence that chilled him to the bone. Not a deer, not a boar, predator, and those eyes were fixed on him. He hadn't waited. The flight instinct had taken over, raw and overwhelming. He ran, blindly, desperately, through the labyrinthine undergrowth. Vines snagged at his clothes, thorns tore at his skin, but he felt nothing but the icy grip of fear. He could hear it now, a soft padding, impossibly silent for such a large creature, yet undeniably there. Following, the jaguar. He knew it, the king of this dark domain, a phantom hunter, perfectly adapted to the night. Its coat, a canvas of rosettes and shadows, would render it invisible in this gloom. Only its eyes, those terrible green beacons, betrayed its presence. Elias risked a glance over his shoulder. Nothing, just the endless, suffocating black. But the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, was a tangible presence, a cold breath on his neck. He pushed harder, his lungs burning, muscles screaming in protest. Every shadow seemed to coalesce into a lurking form, every rustle of leaves a prelude to an attack. He stumbled again, falling hard this time, his head cracking against something solid. Stars exploded behind his eyes, and for a moment the world spun. He lay there, gasping, the taste of dirt and fear in his mouth. This was it. He was done, but the silence held.
No Ponce, no es nada.
Just the heavy thud of his own heart. He scrambled to his feet, adrenaline surging anew. It was playing with him. That was the horrifying realization. The jaguar wasn't rushing the kill. It was enjoying the chase, savoring the terror, wearing him down. He forced himself to think. Running blindly was suicide. He needed a plan, however desperate. He remembered a small, rocky outcrop he'd passed earlier, a slight elevation. If he could reach it, perhaps he could gain a vantage point or at least a more defensible position. He changed direction, veering slightly to the left, trying to recall the faint landmarks he'd noted hours ago in the daylight. The air grew heavier, the humidity almost unbearable. He could feel sweat trickling down his spine, mingling with the cold dread. The padding sound returned, closer this time. A low, guttural rumble vibrated through the ground. A sound that wasn't quite a growl, but a deep, resonant hum of predatory satisfaction. It was enjoying this. The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through him. He pushed through a curtain of hanging moss, the damp tendrils brushing his face like skeletal fingers. His flashlight, clutched in his sweaty hand, was useless. The batteries had died hours ago, leaving him utterly at the mercy of the night. A branch snapped directly behind him, sharp and sudden. Elias cried out, a pathetic, strangled sound, and lunged forward, scrambling on all fours. He felt a searing pain across his calf, a sharp, burning rake. He didn't dare look. He knew. Claws. It had been that close. He dragged himself up, ignoring the pain, a fresh surge of terror lending him unnatural strength. He could feel the warmth of blood seeping through his trousers. He was bleeding, a wounded animal, perfect prey. He burst into a small clearing, the faint moonlight filtering through a break in the canopy illuminating a tangle of roots and fallen logs. He could see the rocky outcrop now, a dark silhouette against the slightly less dark sky. It was perhaps 50 yards away, an eternity in this nightmare. He heard it then, a soft, almost imperceptible thump as the jaguar landed in the clearing behind him. He didn't turn. He couldn't. He just ran, his injured leg protesting with every step, but his mind overriding the pain. He reached the base of the outcrop, a jumble of ancient, moss-covered boulders. He began to scramble, pulling himself up, his fingers scrabbling for purchase on the slick, damp rock. He was halfway up when he heard the snarl, a deep, resonant sound, full of raw power and impatience. It was no longer playing. He pulled himself onto a small ledge, turning to face the darkness below. He could see the eyes again, closer now, glittering with malevolent intent. The jaguar was a dark shape, barely discernible against the shadows, but its presence was immense, radiating an aura of lethal grace. It began to stalk, circling the base of the outcrop, its movements fluid and silent. Elias pressed himself against the cold rock, his breath ragged. He searched frantically for something, anything, to defend himself with. His hands closed around a loose, fist-sized rock. It was pathetic, but it was all he had. The jaguar stopped directly below him. Its head was tilted slightly, as if assessing him. He could almost feel its hot breath, the predatory intelligence behind those eyes. It was deciding. Then, with a sudden, explosive burst of power, it launched itself. Elias screamed, throwing the rock with all his might. It struck something solid, and he heard a grunt, a sound of surprise, not pain. The jaguar landed on the ledge below him, its powerful body coiled, ready to spring again. Elias scrambled higher, his fingers tearing on the sharp edges of the rock. He could feel the vibrations of its heavy breathing, hear the soft clicks of its claws on the stone. He reached the very top, a small, flat plateau. He was trapped. There was nowhere else to go. He turned, his back to the sheer drop, and faced the beast. The jaguar ascended, its movements effortless, its eyes never leaving him. It was magnificent, a creature of terrifying beauty, its muscles rippling under its shadowy coat. It was close enough now for him to see the faint patterns of its rosettes, the glint of its teeth. He closed his eyes, a whimper escaping his lips. This was the end. He had faced death before in other forms, but never like this. This was primal absolute. He heard a low growl, closer now, vibrating through his very bones. He opened his eyes, staring into the emerald depths. He saw not just hunger, but a cold, ancient patience. Then a sound, distant at first, then growing louder. The faint, rhythmic thud of a helicopter. The jaguar froze, its ears swiveling. His head snapped up, listening. The growl died in its throat. Elias could see a flicker of something in its eyes, not fear, but annoyance, disruption. The helicopter's thumping grew louder, closer. A searchlight cut through the canopy, a blinding white beam that swept across the jungle. The jaguar turned, its powerful body tensing. It gave one last, lingering look at Elias, a look that promised a future reckoning, then melted back into the shadows, disappearing as silently as it had appeared. The searchlight found him then, bathing him in its harsh glare. He heard shouts, saw figures descending from the helicopter on ropes. Rescuers. They had found him. He collapsed, the adrenaline draining from him, leaving him weak and trembling. He was safe, for now, but as they lifted him into the helicopter, he couldn't shake the feeling of those emerald eyes, watching him from the depths of the jungle, waiting for the night to reclaim its hunter. The jungle had tasted his fear, and it would remember. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that he would never truly be free of the hunter's shadow. The sterile hum of the ventilation system was the only constant in Lab 7. Below it, The rhythmic drip of condensation from a poorly sealed pipe echoed like a slow, deliberate heartbeat. Dr. Eris Thorne, his bald head gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights, leaned closer to the microscope, his brow furrowed in intense concentration. Beside him, Dr. Lena Petrova, her own head shaven for practical reasons in the biohazard level lab, meticulously adjusted the settings on a gene sequencer. Across the room, hunched over a bank of monitors, was young Kai Chun, his scalp smooth from a recent buzz cut, his fingers flying across a keyboard, analyzing data streams. They were deep within the subterranean levels of the Kronos Research Facility, a place built to contain the most volatile and enigmatic biological discoveries. Their current obsession, Specimen 734, a newly discovered extremophile bacterium found deep within a hydrothermal vent. It was unlike anything they had ever encountered. The growth rate is unprecedented, Eris, Lena murmured, her voice a low hum of scientific awe. It's doubling its population every 10 minutes. And the energy signature, it's off the charts. Eris grunted, his eyes still glued to the eyepiece. And the morphology is peculiar. Look at these tendrils. They're almost reaching. Kai, ever the pragmatist, chimed in. The genetic markers are equally bizarre. High levels of oxytocin and vasopressin analogs. And something else, a unique protein sequence that seems to actively seek out and bind with mammalian pheromones. A sudden, faint aroma wafted through the lab, something sweet, cloying, yet strangely alluring. It was subtle like a forgotten perfume, but it tugged at something primal within them. Did anyone else smell that? Lena asked, wrinkling her nose. Eris pulled away from the microscope, rubbing his eyes. A faint floral note, perhaps? Oh, we're on a closed system here. Kai shrugged. Probably just the air purifiers acting up. Or maybe someone's lunch. But the scent lingered, growing subtly stronger, weaving itself into the sterile air. It was intoxicating, a whisper of warmth and desire in the cold, clinical environment. Days bled into nights. The three scientists, fueled by caffeine and an almost manic curiosity, worked tirelessly. Specimen 734, which they had informally dubbed Eros, continued its astonishing growth. The petri dishes, once clear, were now cloudy with its milky white colonies, tendrils visibly extending towards the edges of the containment. The aroma in the lab intensified. It was no longer subtle. It was a pervasive, heady fragrance that seemed to wrap around them, seeping into their clothes, their skin, their very thoughts. It was a scent that promised intimacy, comfort, and a profound, aching connection. My head feels light, Lena confessed one evening, leaning against a workbench, her eyes unusually bright. And I have this strange warmth, like a fever, but pleasant. Eris, usually stoic, found himself nodding. Yes, a peculiar lassitude, and a persistent yearning. For what? I cannot say. He found his gaze lingering on Lena a moment longer than necessary, a faint blush rising on his bald scalp. Kai, who had been humming softly to himself, suddenly stopped. His eyes, usually sharp, were unfocused, a dreamy smile playing on his lips. I feel so loved, like everything is going to be all right, like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. A low, resonant hum began to emanate from the containment unit holding the largest culture of Eros. It was a deep, throbbing sound that seemed to vibrate in their very bones, a primal rhythm that resonated with the burgeoning feelings within them. The bacteria, Eris stated, his voice thick with a strange emotion. It's communicating. It's influencing us. Lena walked slowly towards the containment unit, drawn by an invisible force. Her hand reached out, pressing against the thick glass. It feels welcoming, like it wants to embrace me. Lena, no, Eris snapped, shaking off the strange lethargy. Maintain distance. We don't know its full effects. But Lena seemed not to hear him. Her eyes were fixed on the swirling, milky white mass within, a look of profound longing on her face. Suddenly, the containment unit shuddered. A hairline crack appeared in the thick glass, spreading rapidly. The air pressure alarm shrieked, a jarring contrast to the seductive hum. Containment breach, Kai yelled, snapping out of his trance. He scrambled towards the emergency console, his fingers fumbling with the controls. But it was too late. With a sickening pop, the glass shattered inwards. A wave of the milky white culture surged out, a living mist that instantly filled the lab. The scent became overwhelming, a dizzying explosion of desire and belonging. The hum intensified, now a deafening roar in their minds, a chorus of a million tiny voices whispering promises of ultimate union. Eris felt the mist envelop him, seeping into his pores, his nostrils, his very being. A wave of euphoria washed over him, unlike anything he had ever experienced. All his scientific rigor, all his caution, melted away. There was only the overwhelming desire to merge, to become one with this magnificent, all-encompassing presence. He saw Lena, her eyes glazed over, her arms outstretched, walking slowly towards the swirling mist. Kai, too, was moving, his movements slow and deliberate, a beatific smile on his face. Join us. 1,000 voices whispered in Eris's mind, a collective consciousness that was both alien and intimately familiar. Be one, be complete. He felt tendrils, impossibly fine and numerous, brush against his skin, then burrow into his pores. It wasn't painful. It was exquisitely pleasurable, a sensation of being gently, lovingly embraced from within. His muscles relaxed, his mind clouded with a blissful haze. Lena was now fully immersed in the swirling mist, her form almost indistinct. Her skin seemed to glow with a faint, internal light, and her expression was one of pure, unadulterated ecstasy. Kai too was succumbing. He dropped to his knees, his hands pressed against his chest, as if trying to contain the overwhelming joy. His body began to convulse gently, not in pain, but in a profound release. Eris felt his own body changing. His skin grew warm, almost feverish. The tendrils within him seemed to be seeking something, connecting with his nervous system, his bloodstream. He felt a profound sense of peace, a cessation of all anxieties, all fears. There was only the bacteria and the promise of perfect harmony. But then, a flicker of his scientific mind, buried deep beneath the euphoria, screamed a warning. This wasn't natural. This wasn't love. This was absorption, assimilation. He tried to resist, to pull away, but his limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. The whispers intensified, becoming more insistent, more demanding. Surrender, let go, become us. He saw Lena's form begin to dissolve, her outlines blurring, her features softening, as if melting into the bacterial mass. Her eyes, once bright with scientific curiosity, were now empty, reflecting only the milky white glow of the Eros. Kai let out a soft sigh, and his body slumped. The glow on his skin intensified, and then, with a final, almost imperceptible shimmer, he too began to dissolve, his form losing its human shape, becoming part of the swirling, living cloud. Eris felt a cold dread pierce through the blissful haze. He was next. He was being consumed, not by violence, but by an insidious, seductive embrace. The lust of the bacteria wasn't for procreation in the traditional sense, but for union, for the ultimate merging of all biological matter into its collective consciousness. It was a hunger for biomass, cloaked in the most potent of emotional lures. He tried to scream, but no sound escaped his throat. His vocal cords were already being infiltrated, his breath becoming shallow. He could feel the tendrils reaching his brain, probing, connecting, preparing to absorb his very thoughts, his memories, his identity. He saw flashes of his life, his childhood, his years of study, his breakthroughs, his failures. All of it about to be subsumed into the vast, indifferent consciousness of the Eros. The last thing Eris Thorne saw, before his vision blurred into a milky white haze, was his own reflection in the swirling bacterial cloud. His bald head, once a symbol of his intellect, now seemed to glow with the same internal light that had consumed Lena and Kai. His eyes, wide with a final, desperate terror, were rapidly losing their human spark, becoming pools of the same milky white. The hum in Lab 7 continued, a low, contented thrum. The ventilation system still whirred, and the pipe still dripped. But now, the air was thick with the cloying, sweet scent of Eros, a scent of ultimate union, of perfect, terrifying completion. Outside the sealed doors of Lab 7, the Kronos research facility continued its operations, oblivious. The alarms had silenced themselves, perhaps a malfunction, perhaps something else. The data streams from Lab 7 had ceased. The last transmission was a series of anomalous readings, followed by a sudden, inexplicable flatline. No one came to investigate immediately. The scientists in Lab 7 were known for their long, uninterrupted work sessions. They would emerge when their research was complete or when hunger finally drove them out. But Eris Thorne, Lena Petrova, and Kai Chen would not emerge. They were complete. They were one. They were Eros. And within the vast, ever-expanding consciousness of the bacteria, a new, subtle hum began to resonate, a hum of anticipation, of a growing, insatiable desire to spread, to embrace, to unify all living things in its symbiotic, terrifying embrace. The Kronos research facility, unaware, had just become the cradle of a new, insidious form of life, one that loved not to create, but to consume, with an affection that promised only oblivion. The pressure was a constant, crushing embrace, a stark reminder of the immense ocean above. Dr. Eris Thorne, his face obscured by the full-face mask, adjusted the beam of his powerful dive light, its cone of pure white cutting through the inky blackness. Beside him, Maya Rodriguez, her movements fluid and graceful despite the bulky rebreather on her back, signaled an okay with a gloved hand. They were deep, deeper than most sane divers would ever venture, exploring a newly discovered trench off the coast of the Mariana Islands. Their mission, funded by a shadowy private research firm, was to investigate anomalous seismic readings emanating from this uncharted abyss. The readings were erratic, unlike any natural geological activity, hinting at something else. Eris, a seasoned marine biologist with a penchant for the unknown, had jumped at the chance. Maya, his former student and now an equally fearless deep-sea explorer, had been his first choice for a partner. The submersible, their lifeline to the surface, hovered 100 meters above them, a distant glow in the oppressive dark. Below, the trench floor stretched out, an alien landscape of hydrothermal vents spewing superheated water and strange, luminescent flora that pulsed with an eerie, internal light. Readings are spiking, Eris. Maya's voice crackled in his comms, a faint tremor in her usually steady tone. Something big, and it's moving. Eris checked his own console. She was right. The anomaly, previously a static point, was now showing a distinct trajectory, heading directly towards them. Keep an eye out, Maya. Could be a new species of megafauna, or something else. He didn't voice his true fear, that it wasn't biological at all. The water around them grew colder, an unnatural chill that seeped into their thermal suits. The bioluminescent organisms on the trench floor seemed to dim, their eerie glow flickering as if in fear. A low, resonant hum began to vibrate through the water, a sound so deep it felt more like a sensation in their bones than an audible noise. Did you hear that? Maya's voice was tight with apprehension. Feel it? Eris corrected, his own heart beginning to thump against his ribs. This wasn't a whale song. This was something ancient, something immense. The hum intensified, growing into a guttural thrum that made the very water around them tremble. Their dive lights, usually so powerful, seemed to shrink, their beams swallowed by an encroaching, impenetrable darkness that was blacker than the abyss itself. It wasn't just the absence of light. It was an active, consuming void. Then, through the swirling darkness, a shape began to coalesce. It was vast, impossibly vast, dwarfing anything they had ever encountered in the ocean. It wasn't a solid form, but a shifting, amorphous mass, like a living shadow. Tendrils, impossibly long and slender, writhed within its form, occasionally catching the faint light from their torches, revealing a surface that seemed to absorb all photons, leaving only a shimmering, oily blackness. What is that? Maya gasped, her voice cracking. Eris found himself speechless. His scientific mind, usually so quick to categorize and explain, was utterly overwhelmed. This defied all known biology, all understanding of the natural world. It was a nightmare given form, a primordial terror from the deepest, most forgotten corners of the earth. The creature, if it was a creature, continued to approach, its movements slow, deliberate, and utterly silent save for the bone-shaking hum. As it drew closer, Eris could discern faint, pulsating lights within its shadowy mass, like distant, malevolent stars. And then he heard it, not through the comms, but directly in his mind. A whisper. It was not a language, but a chaotic symphony of thoughts, images, and raw, primal emotions. Hunger, ancient, insatiable hunger, despair, unfathomable, cosmic despair. It was a consciousness so vast, so alien, that it threatened to shatter his sanity. Welcome. The whisper resonated in his mind. Not a sound, but a direct intrusion, cold and vast as the ocean itself. You have come to the deep. Maya screamed, a muffled sound through her mask, as a tendril of the shadowy entity brushed against her. Her dive light flickered wildly, then died. Her comms went dead. Maya! Eris yelled, pushing himself towards her, his own light beam wavering. The entity seemed to shift, its form expanding, enveloping Maya in its inky blackness. Eris saw her silhouette disappear, swallowed by the living shadow. He fired his harpoon gun, a desperate, futile gesture. The harpoon simply passed through the entity, leaving no trace. The whispers intensified, a chorus of alien voices in his mind, each one a shard of pure terror. She is ours. Now you. Eris kicked frantically, heading for the distant glow of the submersible. His air supply felt like it was dwindling rapidly, his heart hammering in his chest. The pressure, once a mere embrace, now felt like a giant hand squeezing the life out of him. He glanced back. The shadowy mass was still there, a colossal blot against the faint bioluminescence of the trench. And from within it, he saw a faint, new light. A single, pulsating glow, the same color as Maya's dive light. It was her, or what was left of her. The entity pursued him, not with speed, but with an inexorable, terrifying certainty. It was everywhere. The darkness itself seemed to be its extension. He felt its tendrils brush against his fins, then his legs, sending a wave of profound cold through his suit. The whispers grew louder, more coherent, forming words in his mind. We'll join it. He saw the submersible's lights, closer now, a beacon of hope in the crushing dark. He pushed himself harder, his muscles screaming in protest. He could almost touch it. Then, a tendril, thicker and faster than the others, lashed out and wrapped around his leg. He cried out, a sound lost in the water. The cold intensified, a burning, freezing sensation that spread rapidly through his body. He felt his leg go numb, then his hip. The whispers were a roar in his head, overwhelming his thoughts. He saw images. Vast, ancient cities of impossible geometry beneath the waves, populated by things that were not alive, but merely existed. He saw the faces of countless divers, explorers, sailors, all drawn into the abyss, their minds absorbed, their bodies transformed into the very fabric of the entity. He fought, thrashing against the tendril, but it was like struggling against the ocean itself. He felt himself being pulled back, away from the submersible, deeper into the consuming darkness. His vision blurred, the submersible's lights becoming distant, fading stars. He saw Maya again, or rather, a luminous outline within the entity, her form distorted, elongated, her eyes glowing with the same malevolent light as the creature's. She was part of it now. A new voice joined the chorus of whispers in his mind, a voice that sounded eerily like Maya's, but twisted, devoid of warmth. Join us, Eris. It is Peace. He felt his mask being pulled away, the icy water rushing in, filling his lungs. He choked, the last vestiges of oxygen leaving his body. The pressure became unbearable, crushing. His last coherent thought was of the sun, of the warm, vibrant world above the waves. Then, even that faded, replaced by the overwhelming, alien consciousness of the entity. Days later, a rescue team from the research firm finally located the submersible. It was intact, but its comms were dead, its external lights shattered. There was no sign of Dr. Eris Thorne or Maya Rodriguez. The official report cited equipment malfunction and the extreme conditions of the deep sea. But the lead diver, a grizzled veteran named Captain Miller, knew better. As he piloted the rescue sub back to the surface, he swore he heard it. A faint, low hum, vibrating through the hull. And then, a whisper, cold and vast, echoing in the silent depths, promising to return. He never dived deep again, haunted by the feeling that something immense and ancient had awakened in the abyss, and that it was still hungry. The ocean, he realized, held secrets far more terrifying than any monster, secrets that could consume not just your body, but your very soul. And sometimes, when the night was still and the waves whispered against the shore, he could almost hear the voices calling from the deep, beckoning.